Thumbs up on it, Conrad? Yep.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's Mundelein Elementary School District 75 Board of Education for May something. Thank you, May 18th. We have sort of a weird thing at the beginning of the meeting tonight. We have two public hearings on budget budget things, and then we'll proceed to the regular meeting. So first, we're going to do a call to order the meeting on the adoption of the amended fiscal year 2021 budget. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Here.
Rhodes.
Here.
St. Clair. Here. Pittsky.
Here.
Gallegos.
Here.
Fingerhut. Here. Liz here.
Here.
Good
Okay,
evening.
wait, hang on.
Oh, sorry.
First, are there any citizens' comments tonight only pertaining to the amended 2021 budget? We'll have opportunity to address the board if you need to when we start the actual board meeting. But right now, this is the public hearing for the fiscal 2021 budget, amended budget. Okay, hearing none. Time for questions and answers.
You ready to go?
Okay, the purpose of our budget meeting is to discuss the tentative amended budget and also provide an opportunity for the public to ask questions and provide input on the tentative amended budget. Illinois School Code requires that we file an amended budget if in any given fund we exceed 10% of the adopted budget, or well, if we exceed the 10% of the adopted budget in the expenditure fund. As we are going to exceed 10%, it looks like at this point, in the capital projects fund, we are filing an amended budget. We have not made any changes to the budget as of its adoption last May. The only change we have made is to increase the expenditures in the capital projects fund to allow for what we anticipate to happen this fiscal year. Each year we run into that situation where we have timing differences, especially in capital projects funds. And so that's what's causing our amended budget for FY21. So at tonight's meeting, we will be requesting and asking that the Board of Education adopt the amended FY21 budget as presented. The form, it has been provided in your packet if you'd like to take a moment to look at that as well. Do we have any questions?
And we would need everybody's signatures on that form.
Correct. We will need everyone's signature as to how they vote.
Is that a call for public comment again?
No, there's
No.
questions from the board.
Oh,
Right.
About the amended budget.
I don't have any.
Okay, then I believe I give it back to you, Board
No one
President.
has any questions? Okay. Okay, since there are no other questions, we're going to adjourn this meeting. I move that we adjourn the public hearing number 1 for the amended fiscal year 2021 budget.
So moved.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Pittsky?
Yes. Aye.
Rose?
Aye.
Holly?
Aye.
Gallegos?
Aye.
St. Clair? Aye. Fingerhut? Aye. Phillips here?
Aye.
All right, I now call to order public hearing number 2 for tonight, the adoption of the fiscal year 21-22 budget at 7:05 PM. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Holly?
Here?
Phillips here?
Here.
Fingerhut? Here? Pittsky?
Here.
Kayakis.
Here.
St. Clair. Here. Rhodes.
Here. Okay, first thing is citizens' comments. If anyone has a comment about the fiscal year 21-22 budget that was on public display, now it's time to ask those questions. If you have other questions or want to talk to the board, we will have that as part of the regular meeting as soon as we're done with this budget hearing. No comments? Okay, Pete? All you.
As we look at our FY '22 budget, if you go to the next slide, Anna. We're going to take a look at all of our funds as a whole, our operating funds, our debt funds, our capital funds, and then give opportunity for questions again. You can go to the next slide. If we're looking at our operating budget for next year, our operating funds are defined as funds 10, 20, 40, 50, and 70. Those are those funds that are required to operate the district on a day-to-day basis. We look at these funds separately because when we're looking at these funds and whether or not we have enough revenues to support our expenditures, we're looking at the operations of the district. That's what these funds are. When we look at Fund 30, for example, which is not included in the operating funds, that is our debt service fund. We're going to receive money in a different time frame than when we're going to pay those funds. So any deficit or surplus will have an impact of 0 at the end of the day for our Fund 30 expenditures. If we look at our Fund 60 expenditures, that's our site and construction that we just discussed. We're going to have also timing issues. You're going to oftentimes receive a large lump sum of money in the issuance of a bond to pay for construction projects that are held in future years. And that's exactly what we have as well. So when we're looking at whether or not we have a surplus or a deficit, we look only at our operating funds. The changes that have occurred from last board meeting until now would be overall increase of about $6,000 to an anticipated surplus of $12,000 in our operating funds. The major change that happened from from last board meeting to this board meeting is the addition of the ESSER 2 grant into our document and our budget as a whole, as well as the associated expenditures. So that had an impact for the most part of 0 on our fund balance, but that was a significant change from last time to this time. So having posted our notice in the paper regarding today's budget hearing, at tonight's meeting, we will be requesting that the Board of Education adopt the FY '22 budget as presented. And then I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, okay, thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Okay, no further business coming before the board. This meeting will be adjourned. I move that we adjourn the public hearing number 2 for the 21-22 budget.
So moved. Second.
Call the roll.
College.
Aye.
Phillips here.
Aye.
Kayakis.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Rhodes.
Aye.
Fitzke.
Aye.
Finger. Aye.
Okay, now it's time for the Mundelein Elementary School District 75 Board of Education meeting, Tuesday, May 18, 2021 at 7:08 p.m. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Rhodes.
Here.
St. Clair. Here. Kayakis.
Here.
Fingerhut. Here. Phillips here.
Here.
Fitzke.
Here.
Do we have anyone present this evening who wishes to address the board? Yeah, I'm just going to read for everyone the letter that I think you all received by email today from Karen. She couldn't attend either in person or via Zoom, so she asked if someone would read this. I'm going to do that. Hi, my name is Carrie Sweet, and I have a 5th grader and an 8th grader, and have lived in the district for 5 years. As an educator in a nearby elementary district, I have worked with students K-12 throughout my 27-year teaching career. I wanted to express my thoughts about one of the agenda items and topics of discussion throughout the school community, the proposed start and end times for next school year. Various arguments have been made that include it not fitting parent work schedules, older kids need to watch younger kids, kids being at after-school childcare longer, the cost of childcare, and others. These concerns are legitimate and of course should be voiced. However, on the flip side, the main goal of the school district is to educate students and to first and foremost consider what is best for kids. There's an abundance of research on this topic, And it all points to the fact that these proposed times will benefit kids. Middle schoolers are more available for learning with the later start time and the added sleep, while the younger students are better as they have a harder time learning and focusing as the afternoon goes on. The research highlights these results. I have also experienced the same successes in my own classroom and have seen it with my own children. Yes, when making decisions, schedules, calendars, budgets, etc., are considered and accommodated along the way, because we do not live in a vacuum. There are definitely other factors at play. At the same time, a student moves to a different building within the district about every 3 years, and families accommodate each of those transitions. So the goal should be to set kids up for success. Most surrounding districts have already moved to similar start and end times over the past 5 years and have seen success. I'm not saying follow the crowd, but when the crowd has had positive results and has seen positive progress and improvements in student learning, then yes, that is something to consider. In closing, I hope that we don't get caught up in our own schedules and drag kids to accommodate adults. The success and potential of kids should be considered and put first, because in the end, we all love our kids and want what is truly best for them. Thank you for your time. Carrie Sweet. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board? Please raise your hand on the icon on the bottom of the screen if you do. Seeing that there are anyone interested in making a comment. Last chance, making comments to the board. Okay, seeing none from our computer tech, we will move on. First item is the District 75 report. We will now hear the report from the business office.
Good evening. The first two items on the business office report are related to the hearings that we just held. We're asking now for board adoption, having held the public hearing. We're asking for board adoption of the FY21 amended budget and FY22 amended budget. So those are the first two items in your packet. The last item from the business office is the approval of our copier purchase. We are recommending that the Board of Education approve that the district actually purchase its own copiers this fiscal year instead of leasing them from year to year to year. One of the main reasons that in every district I have been in, recommend purchase rather than lease is lease payments come out of those operating funds that we just discussed. Those funds that are required to operate the district from year to year to year, and those items that are also used to determine whether or not we have a surplus or a deficit. So if you're able to do your purchase all up front in 1 year, which is a great use of fund balance, the perfect use of fund balance, then eliminating those lease payments frees up money that can be used otherwise to educate students. So that is why this recommendation is coming forward. That coupled with the fact that our 90% of our leases are coming up due here in August. So that's the recommendation that administration is proposing to the board this evening.
So this is the first that I've seen 90% of the leases. What does that mean exactly?
We do have two buildings, like, for example, Lincoln is one of the buildings that is not on the exact same schedule as the other buildings in terms of the lease payments come due in August. They're on, I think they have 2 more years on their lease. So what we're also doing is the copiers that we'll be purchasing will go into those buildings along with the 2 leased copiers to provide backup for any of the buildings if they have a breakdown, as well as backup for that building itself, at least until the leases are up and those machines are taken. We did have a group of representatives from all the buildings as well as technology participate in the selection of these copiers so that we hopefully are providing not only something that makes sense financially, but something that everyone can support at all the levels.
And these new printers are new and improved, much better, can make much better use of.
Correct. They have a lot of the needs that our secretaries have explained, for example, stapling, hole punching, those types of things, as well as the number of copies per minute. So again, we had them involved throughout that entire process so that we would be making the best informed decision. This is going to save us about $100,000 to $140,000 a year that we can now use to educate students instead of paying for a lease payment.
What is the lifespan of the copiers we're purchasing?
So we have right now, these copiers have a 5-year lifespan. Obviously, as you get to the end of the lifespan, we'll see. But the important thing when you make this kind of a change is that you also have these types of expenses set up in a refresh cycle. So the important thing is that in our 5-year plan, we have the refresh cycle built into the financial piece of it as well.
And there's a service contract that goes along with it.
Service contract goes along, and they're making a significant change for us. They're allowing us to do our copy count once a year. So you run into ebbs and flows with your copy count. So the copy companies love to say, we're going to check you each month because they know in summer you have no copy purchases. So they hit you with they hit you with those copier fees during those non-high months or during the high months. So they'll allow us to do this once a year, which will give us the best savings in terms of copy overage costs.
Do we typically have copy overage costs on the lease machine?
We have, yes, it's, I believe, $3,000 a month right now. So this will hopefully eliminate that as well. That's included in the cost.
So does the number of copies come into play as far as the service agreements?
Yep.
That's, because obviously it's gonna be our machine, so but it's the service.
It's the service agreement, and we've done an analysis on our usage to make sure that we're allotting for hopefully enough.
And then thank you for the details in the follow-up questions. So when you say there's more than one lease, it's those 3 items that you listed, because that was,
That's why there's
Clarify.
two
Okay,
different
got it.
companies as well, yes. But we will no longer be paying COTG at all. They are the service part.
okay, so 2 leases and a service.
Correct.
And just throwing it out there, and I'm assuming that you have them in each building because that's where the immediate need is versus like setting up like a copy center for both districts or some other.
Correct. I actually was in a district that had a copy center. I have started to look into the opportunity for that, but at this point, it didn't seem cost effective. So we're keeping those at the building at this point.
Can you tell us where the copiers are going? You said it says there's 8 of them.
Yes, so there's basically 2 going into each building. So there's a color and a black and white going into Carl Sandburg, Mechanics Grove, Washington, and the district office. Lincoln right now, they're holding off on because we have that lease that's expiring.
I thought you said we were still purchasing something like that to have as backups.
Nope, sorry, no. The backups that we're going to have are going to be the district office ones, not the Lincoln. Sorry, those are going into the other room to be used as backup. Sorry.
That's okay. I just.
Okay, so then I just have to ask the clarifying question because I put it on the questions and I saw your response, but you preface this by saying that every district you've ever been at, you've bought copiers, except this current lease is ending after 5 years, right?
Every district I've always purchased leases or purchased copiers at every district. I've had leases at other districts, but my recommendation has always been to purchase or lease anything.
Okay. So why do we currently have lease copiers?
Because it was within a couple months of being here that the lease was up on our copiers at the time. I've almost been here 5 years and they were a 5-year lease. So that kind of helps put it into time frame. I came in, I had to work with our copy company and just continue with what we had done in the past. Plus, I did not have a good handle at that point on our fund balance and where we were, and if we were healthy enough yet to recommend the use of fund balance to make that purchase.
Do you have any other questions?
One more. These are we are purchasing from a different company than the company we had the leasing from, correct?
Correct. You're not happy with those, and we're also using a consortium, so it's not required to be bid.
And you did compare different companies.
We even use the same company that we currently have as well, and they were not able to give us a comparable package.
Well, the current company we currently have wouldn't sell us copiers, correct?
They will sell us the ones we currently have, but the proposal they gave us was to lease again, even though we specifically asked them that we want to purchase. But you can buy your leases at the end, your current copiers at the end.
But then you have to purchase service contracts on top of it.
Yes. And their service contract is for it.
Great.
Okay, anything else about copiers?
Thank you very much.
Next up, the teaching and learning report.
Good evening, everybody. We have a busy teaching and learning report today. So first, we're going to talk about math curriculum revision. I have Ashley Buckman and Brittany Busher, two Carl Sandburg teachers, who will be joining me up here in a moment. We'll follow that up with our sleep study. It's Dr. Nika Winarski and Dr. Nicole Rousseau-Pansaran that are going to be joining us to talk a little bit about the sleep study and give an overview of that. And then we'll round out the teaching and learning report with Mr. Pilot talking about the start times for next year. Okay, so tonight we bring a recommendation to the Board of Education about a new curriculum resource for middle school math. I use the term curriculum resource to describe this because we're seeking to purchase the textbook, the online subscription, and all the ancillary materials that our teachers will use to develop the scope and sequence, the units, and the activities that will engage students in the discovery of mathematics. Together, all of these things will further develop our middle school math curriculum as a whole. Next slide, please. As we went through our process this year, the middle school math department developed a vision for math instruction at the middle school. This is something that will extend, hopefully in the future, through our K-5 program. This was used to evaluate our options that we use for our resource, as well as drives the professional development and the curriculum moving forward. I just want to point out one thing in our vision. I think as an acknowledgement of the times, you see in that second to last bullet, supporting students by addressing unfinished learning systematically. That's something obviously over time will drop off, but we want to be keenly aware that teaching in a pandemic, we know and we want to anticipate that there will be gaps in skills and gaps in conceptual understanding, but we still strive for those grade level content areas. And so we wanted to make sure that that was part of our vision, at least in the short term. Next slide, please. Whenever we engage in curriculum revision, we have a cycle that's 4 parts, including the vision statement. The team engaged in the research phase, and that comprised of looking inward at ourselves, looking at the strengths and opportunities that lie in our own program, as well as looking outward and understand the landscape of math curriculum resources, the new pedagogy, and then the research around math instruction. And so joining me from the Carl Sandburg Math Department is Brittany Busher and Ashley Buckman, who are 6th grade math teachers or 7th grade this year?
7th and 8th this year.
7th and 8th grade this year. They do everything. They're amazing. To share a little bit of our work and discuss the recommendation. So I'm going to turn it over to Brittany.
Hi there. In phase 1, we did a lot of research and looked at 4 different curriculums. We currently are using Discovery Education Math Textbook. And then we met with representatives from Carnegie Learning, Illustrative Mathematics, and Big Ideas Learning. When deciding on bringing in new curriculum, we had stepped back to look at what was going well and what we were missing or what we needed more of as a department. Things that were working well for us was the balance of technology and pencil to paper instruction, especially in this last year, and the ability to balance our conceptual understanding as well as our skill practice.
As a math team, when we discussed what improvements we were looking for with a new curriculum, we agreed that these were the top enhancements that we needed. Student choice supports for students, multilingual support, even more than just Spanish, because we do have students that come in that speak other languages as well. And then differentiated pathways to algebra. And this led us to Big Ideas as our final choice. Big Ideas offers a very nice balance between digital tools and paper and pencil and hands-on resources. The student choice and supports that are built into the curriculum have a wide variety of practice tools. There's online games, there's digital resources that are available, but there's also really good materials that we can print off so that students can show their work on paper and do that, because we know that there needs to be a balance of things online as well as on paper. Teachers can assign whole class, small groups, and or individual students specific problems to work on. We can also allow for different levels of support within the things that we are able to assign online, which is really nice. The materials are also available in, I can't even remember, was it 19 different languages, which we thought was a really nice addition.
Just building off of that, the progression of the lesson also started with like an open-minded question and opportunity for the students to explore. And so we weren't just jumping into like, write down this formula and now do it. The customization went beyond just the lesson and all of the resources that were available. Our assessments are not only aligned to standards, but also customizable per student groups or per student classes that might be differentiated. These assessments were also available online as well as on paper. There were quizzes, pre-tests, post-tests, but also projects as a way to assess. And these all came in multiple formats as well. So there wasn't just one project available or one test available to give. This is the K-8 math program. It is staying the same for K-5, continuing on with Bridges. And at the middle school level, all programs will stay the same. However, what students are using is what is different. So all of those programs that you see up there in the middle school level are still available, and Ashley's going to touch on those.
Can you go to the next slide, please? So this leads into something that is near and dear to my heart, which is our Big Ten program, because I had the privilege of being a part of it when we first started it. And several years ago, we kind of looked at the percent of students that were taking algebra as 8th grade. And as you can see, it was about 14%. And that's when we implemented the Big Ten program. The Big Ten, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is an accelerated program for students where in 6th grade, they have a double block of math, and we cover all of the 6th grade standards and half of the 7th grade standards. In 7th grade, we also have a double block of math, and we finish up the rest of the 7th grade standards and cover all of the 8th. This has allowed our students to take algebra as 8th graders and open up more opportunities to them when they get to the high school level. When that first group moved up to 8th grade, we had 34% of our students taking algebra in 8th grade. We have been able to find out from Mundelein High School that 85% of our students earned a C or better in honors geometry, which is absolutely amazing because so many of those students wouldn't have even had that opportunity. With this new curriculum, we have some really cool opportunities available to us, and I'm going to hand it back over to Dan to talk about some of those.
Can we go back one slide for a second? I want to reiterate what Brittany was saying about our program is really staying the same. The only thing that we're changing are the tools that we're using in instructing our students. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see, and we're total math geeking out on this, right? Because we love this slope here, right? The high rate of change of our students entering algebra, but it's starting to kind of level off. And we ask ourselves, how do we change that, right? And so when we go to the next slide, we want to provide more opportunities for our kids. So in the current program that we have with Big Ideas and the recommendation, it meets the needs of our on-level students and it meets the needs of both of our accelerated programs. There's a way for us to utilize this. What's different about this program is they have a third option to get to algebra by 8th grade. And that third option, you go back one, or sorry, one more. You'll notice in our current program, decisions about whether kids are going to make it to algebra happen in 6th grade. Can you go 2 slides forward? In this program, which we're still working on, trying to figure out what does this look like, the identification of moving quicker towards algebra happens in 7th grade. It's another opportunity for us to find students that are going to have access to algebra in 8th grade. We know from the research how important accessing algebra in 8th grade is in terms of college and career readiness, in terms of our underrepresented populations, including our low socioeconomics, where they'll have opportunities by taking algebra in 8th grade to get to those AP classes and get college credit while they're still in a public school. And so we really love this part on the flexibility. I think Brittany and Ashley both talked about this in terms of differentiation for our students. The differentiation is going to be seamless. You won't know that you're having a differentiated test because everybody's clicking a link. Everybody has it in their Chromebook right there. And then we're really excited about the flexibility moving forward. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is sort of our implementation timeline as we're thinking through how this looks. After the board approves our recommendation, thank you very much in advance, hopefully. We'll get started on our initial professional development that will take place spring or summer. We'll also get down to work on what I talked about in terms of curriculum development, scope and sequence work, building our units, building our activities, and adding to an already robust curriculum. Because when we do curriculum revision, we don't just throw everything out that we did before. We take the things that worked really well. We'll be continuing that work throughout the summer and then into next year. We've been working with the publishers for big ideas to talk about professional development, going back to that research phase. When we were looking at some of the work, we noticed that some of the work was built around math discussions. And so we wanted to embed that professional development for our teachers around math discussions. I should have we got our first textbook today. Shh, don't tell anybody. Because we weren't supposed to get them until much later. And you'll see in the algebra book, it talks about how it's got a section called Calc Chats about getting kids prepared to accept the challenge of calculus in 8th grade. That's pretty exciting as an 8th grade student to think that that's where I'm going to end up. We'll be engaging in professional development throughout next year, both on math chats, but also around math instruction and curriculum development. We'll be using as much as we can our half days, our institute days, our early releases. We've already started to develop some of those with the publisher to make sure that we have captured those days before anybody else gets them, because we know that it's going to be different again as we go to 100% of our students, or at least almost 100% of our students in person. You go to the next slide. Just to give, before we get into the numbers about big ideas, I wanted to kind of go back in time, got in my DeLorean, looked back in our board report to see our current program, which Ashley talked about, Math Tech Book. That program did not have an algebra component. We added an algebra component, which ironically is Big Ideas, a previous version. And we invested in professional development. What I want to make sure is very clear is that when we looked at Math Tech Book, we knew we were getting into something that didn't have a physical textbook. And you may remember a couple years back, for those of you who are on the board, when Discovery Education kind of did a publicity thing with Mundelein, they praised us for our ability to balance the paper pencil and the electronic. But that's a constant battle with our students. And so having a physical textbook further focuses our students that not everything that you see online, you have to do online. Sometimes you have to draw a picture of something. Sometimes you have to work it out a couple of different ways before you can enter your answer online. And so we believe that with the physical textbook that we're going to get, and not every child will have one that will need one to go home, we're going to try to balance the needs of students. Some students like not carrying the textbook around, like to access the textbook online. Some students need a physical textbook at home. We want to be able to meet the needs of all of the students. And so this gives you an idea of what that was. It was a 6-year subscription. We're at the end of our 6-year subscription. Again, and we're at the point in our curriculum revision cycle where we need to make a choice about, are we staying with Discovery Textbook, or are we moving on to the next thing? And you'll see on the next slide what the budget looks like for moving into Big Ideas. Let's acknowledge it's like $45,000 more. Where is that coming from? A lot of it's coming from the physical books that we're getting. And Every classroom will be outfitted with a classroom set of the books for the teacher of the course that they're teaching, as well as books for students to take home if they need to have a book, or sometimes it might be part of an IEP, it might be part of some other accommodation that our students need. We've also talked about some of the professional development work and some of the summer curriculum work that is going to be put into this. You'll see it's another $5,000 over what we paid for professional development earlier. I think T had talked about the ESSER 2 grant. And so in the ESSER 2 grant, we got creative and we're able to fund this all in our ESSER 2 grant. And so there'll be no local funds that are expended for this purchase, for this move. And this will take care of us for the next 6 years and set us up nicely for math instruction at the middle school. So next slide. With that, I will take, well, we will take some questions.
Question. So I know, speaking from experience, as over the last 3 years, I've had experience being a parent in 4 different middle school classes. And I was surprised to learn that not one of them used the math textbook in the curriculum, because when I was trying to help my child with various things, I asked, will you use the textbook? And my girls looked at me like I had two heads. And then when I asked the teachers, they basically said, no, go to Khan Academy. That's a free online resource, like everybody, So if we're buying these textbooks, is it going to be a collaborative effort among the teachers to use them? Since that is a big expense, but I can see the value of that for not, many reasons.
I can speak to that. I was on both teams when we picked textbook and then when we picked this team. When we picked textbook, our full team was not all there for that decision for various reasons. Our full math team right now has been here for this decision, and every single one of us is really excited about this purchase. Textbook also was kind of on the cutting edge of the technology piece, and it was a very new and very difficult thing to jump into on the teaching end. Big Ideas has a lot more teacher supports that are in place, which I think will greatly help the consistency for the entire math department. That would be my opinion on it.
No, and that's good to know, and that's what I wanted to know, because it felt to me as though when I was being told from the teachers as a parent that they were kind of putting it all together as they go, which is disappointing because we hate to think that each teacher has to basically recreate the curriculum. And I hate the idea of us switching to a new curriculum only to have all this professional development and time and effort on the teacher's part that have to go into doing that. So that's why one of my questions, but it's been answered, was were the teachers really all involved with this? Because I think that that's important rather than just having us in the room pick a curriculum.
I have a couple. First off, can the Big Ideas eventually filter down into the lower grades?
There is a Big Ideas program for kindergarten through 5th grade. That's something that can be discussed later. I think my recommendation where I sit today would be to stay with Bridges. They have provided a support for our teachers through the pandemic and continued support for next year. That's really been unparalleled to any other resource that we're using.
But as you see how Big Ideas works with the middle school, maybe revisit that again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
And then over the 6 years, are there updates provided? Because even in math, things change every year. So.
Yeah. I'll update. So they don't update the physical textbooks. They do update the online textbook as well as the tools, as well as the platform. So one of the reasons that some of our summer work was delayed a little bit, or that why I said don't say that anything that our books came today, is because they are in the midst of updating their platform. And so that is scheduled to be done July 1. So we all know how technology works.
What year are we in the Bridges? We only switched to that.
We're in year 6 as well with the Bridges. The thing with Bridges is there is a physical, there's a binder system as well as an online resource. The Math Learning Center, which publishes Bridges, is a non-for-profit. And so it's not a subscription, it's a one-time access to their website. And so we're still using it to both our math instruction in our number corner, which is part of the number center. And it's really working well for our teachers right now. And our students, I should say.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the many languages that the book can come in. Are there additional costs for those languages if we wanted to access those?
No, there is no additional cost. The difference, I think, between textbook and I think I may have answered one of the questions like this. The difference between math textbook and Big Ideas is the way that they enter text into the computer, into the system. And so in math textbook, it's a lot of images. Images don't translate well. But in Big Ideas, they have a lot of their ability to translate both textbook and then some of the ancillary materials are already directly translated.
Am I understanding correctly that students will have a choice whether or not they want a physical textbook or just use the online
That's our
resources?
hope. Yeah, and everybody will have access to the physical textbook in the classroom.
Okay,
It's about what that home that it looks like for them. And that's, I mean, our teachers, we spent a lot of time discussing, right? I don't think we were shy about spending to where we needed it, but we also didn't want piles of textbooks in the back room of Carl Sandburg. And so we went in very cautiously right now. There is some room for growth if we find that we need.
I have a couple of questions too. So just piggybacking on the choice question, you had mentioned games and activities. So is that like supplemental material that kids can choose to do, or can you explain that aspect? Because I'm imagining there's not choice on a pre-test or a test. But
Yeah, so a lot of those games are built in through the system and they're just available. So if the kid wants to go online at home and play a math game, they're there. They can
okay,
do one.
great.
And I was definitely playing several of those games. And even within those games, the kids can choose their level, which was really cool. They can choose like a 1-step equation, 2-step equation, multi-step. So they can, within that platform, choose what they want to start with and hopefully build up.
I also had a question about, it's great that you listed the ongoing embedded professional development. And I guess, was there any thought or vision to, we're going to be asked later to approve some literacy support roles. So I was curious if there was any thought that a math or science support role might be advantageous above and beyond the delivered
So
professional.
that would be when I go over it. So those are the things that we're looking at. And just to the point here, that role would be one of the things that would be able to support year 4, 5 after the publishers have left and the PD to keep that going.
Oh, okay, because I read the description as being more literacy.
That's what we're looking for too.
And then my last question was, do you see this as impacting, we were provided a handy list of all like your literacy programs and all the things on the books that we have. And it looks like there's a number of programs or materials that are meant for intervention, but not special education in the math area. So do you see, as our math gets stronger, that the need for some of that goes away? Because a lot of the ones listed are targeting, it looks like, the middle school. Math lab with Imagine Math, SRA after school math. I was just trying to put it all in context of all the math
Yes, I mean,
resources
the
that
hope
we
would
have.
always be to limit our need for intervention as best as we could, if we can do it in the tier 1 setting. Big Ideas does have some materials that we can also use for intervention, and it has also been a conversation. I know you mentioned Imagine Math. That is one we're using for summer, with an option to increase if we need next year. So I guess in short, yes, I would hope that we would need some of those less over time.
And that would be a measurement too of the success of the program beyond scores, the need to do
Mhm.
supplemental intervention, if I'm using the right term.
Yeah, I mean, the board had set a goal 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we did Big Ten to increase algebra. I think that was a really great measurement of our success. I think as an added bonus, because we're so closely connected to the high school, we're able to get those first semester grades for that next course to get an idea of we prepare them well. Like, yeah, we got them to the course, but then what happened? Did they just bomb or did they do well? And early results of the way that you're working with our students through the double block are very positive. It gives us an ability to think differently maybe about the future and increase those. I'd love to see it. Don't quote me on this, but I'd love to see it where 50% of our students in the near future are getting to algebra in 8th grade. That's a great benchmark, a great watermark for us to be as a goal. Because we know success-wise, we know those students will be successful.
Did I understand you to say that bridges will work in conjunction with this?
Yeah.
The bridges is that 6th year.
Correct. So Bridges doesn't have a subscription the way Math did. All of our programs are built on Common Core State Standards. Common Core State Standards give us the expectations per grade level. So we're staying on course with our grade level expectation year over year. As we move from program A, Bridges, to program B, we should see very little any dip in our scores.
So then we were also talking about moving out of the last 3 years. And we also provided numbers on local staff and more students once they got into high school with the success. So is there any projection that this will increase and improve? Because you mentioned now it starts in 7th grade. Will that if we were able to enhance this and make it
Can you go back to that graph for a second? It's hard to project, but I can give you sort of a benchmark to look at.
This one?
Yeah, can you go to that graph on this slide? So when Ashley was talking about this slide, she said, here's where we implemented, here's where we saw the results. Because when we want to increase our students in Algebra 1, we have to take a multi-year approach. The best practice is not to skip standards. The best practice is to compact those standards. And so when we talk about like another entry point, it gives us another opportunity to look at student work, to look at their battery of tests and say, like we do for Big Ten, are there kids that we didn't catch in the high level that could be in this level and still get to algebra? We would do the same thing for our 7th graders. We would say, are there kids that are performing really well in 6th grade that can now get that extra boost? I don't know what it's going to look like. If it's going to be a 2-period class like Big Ten, if it's going to be a single period. I mean, those are things that we have to discuss. That's why it's an opportunity for growth in the future. I don't think with everything going on right now, our teachers are ready to just tackle that particular problem. But it does address this. And so instead of 3 years implementation, we would see hopefully maybe 2 years and then get them to Algebra 1. And then like we do currently with the high school, we'll want to monitor how those students do and make sure that when they get to honors geometry, which is amazing, that they're still performing well in that first semester to know about our preparation.
Can I ask you a question about how do you go about deciding it? Like, for example, how many spots there are in 6th grade Big Ten math? Do you do that based on where you see the 5th graders that are coming in? Do you do that based on, hey, we have 2 teachers, therefore we have 30 slot or whatever?
Ashley's
We're in
my
that process
protege.
right now.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know how it
Every year,
works, but-
every year, we take the 5th grade data, we use the STAR data as our initial data point. We look at their, the scores over the whole year rather than just the final spring one. And we have our starting point cut scores, but then we meet with the 5th grade teachers and we go through student by student and we see how they're doing in math and we get that teacher feedback to make the placements. Although we have what we think we need for sectioning, we really base it off of the scores and what is needed. So I think the first year we did Big Ten, we had one section of it. And then next year, as we looked at it, we realized we needed two. And we were able to make that change. And I think the same thing has happened over time with the CC, accelerated CC6. And we have increased or decreased depending on where the scores and the needs of the students were at.
So that was my question with the, like with the graph, were we starting to see a leveling out just because there wasn't room to start, have like an extra section, which would have eventually ended up with a whole other section of students in algebra.
And,
But
and I
it's
would
not
I would
necessarily
say
that. Okay,
no.
that's good to know.
If I could add to what Ash is saying, cut scores is sometimes a dirty word, I guess I would say. We really look at ranges and we look for natural breaks in the data and use those natural breaks to populate our classes. And then we come to you and we say, we need an extra section of Big Ten sixth grade. And the reason we're coming to you about that is because when we put that double block in sixth grade for acceleration of students, we're also the next year putting that double acceleration double block in seventh grade where we don't have a double block all the time for math. So we want to make sure that you're in, but we are wanting to meet the needs of all of our students. And so that's the way we do it. We've also in the past taken, I think, first couple of years of Big Ten, we've gone into eighth grade and we've said, how did those students end up? Did we make the right decisions? Did we miss students? And then that informs our fifth grade that year as well.
But that's good to know that we're not just saying, oh, we only have this many slots and we'll put you in, because of that limits. But so we are doing it as a student focus.
100%.
Okay.
Yes. I know, because parents will email me about cut scores and I said,
And I'm not asking.
give you a range.
Yeah. I'm just curious about, like
Yeah.
I said, whether or not there was one section, two sections, but the fact that we are willing to grow the sections if there is the ability and need for it. And that's
100%.
what's helpful.
Thank you.
Are there non-Big Ten students in algebra and eighth grade?
Yes.
So this 85% number, is this just Big Ten students we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, do we have any data on the students that are not Big Ten students?
They're getting Caesar better at 100% rates. So, I mean, all of our students who are getting into algebra, I believe, into geometry, I mean, I could double check, but pretty sure that when we broke apart that data, the students in our accelerated were all getting Caesar better. And then we looked at our students to see where our Big Ten students were. Very exciting to be in Mundelein.
So what's the percentage of eighth graders that take algebra?
About a third of our students on a regular basis over the last 3 years. It's about 33%.
That's my question. I didn't understand the graph at first. That was helpful. I was like, what if you?
Yeah.
Why?
It's a little bit over. We're at 34, 36% on a regular basis, but a third gives me a good understanding that 1 out of every 3 kids is entering eighth grade in algebra.
That's what we were saying. Ideally, it would be great if we could have half, but
Would love it.
good problem to have, right?
It's a great problem to have. Okay, thank you. So for the next teaching and learning report, I'm going to invite Dr. Nika Winarski and Dr. Nicole Russo-Ponsaran to talk about the sleep study. Questions from the board?
So thank you to Dr. Myers and to the board for inviting us to present to you today. As you said, my name is Nicole Russo-Ponsaran, and I'm an associate professor at Rush University Medical Center. And I'm here tonight with Dr. Winarski. I've been conducting research on elementary students for over 20 years now, and for the past 13 years, my emphasis has been on social emotional learning, emotional health and well-being, and educational research. Dr. Winarski is a pediatric clinical psychologist and an assistant professor with expertise in child development, behavior regulation, and family therapy. Not here today, but an integral member of our team is Dr. Stephanie Crowley, and she is also an associate professor at Rush with expertise in adolescent sleep and circadian rhythm. So recently, families were asked to complete a survey about changing the school start time such that the high school students would start later at 8:40 a.m., middle schoolers at 8:20, third through fifth graders at 8, and kindergarten through second graders at 7:45. As a parent of a first grader at Washington School, I immediately became curious about what are the consequences of an early start time on elementary students. This prompted several conversations with Dr. Myers, and that led to the prospect of conducting a research study to formally measure the impact of the proposed change. So as a means of orientation, I'm going to present to you what we know, what we don't know, some of the benefits of collaborating on a study, and our initial ideas about what a comprehensive and holistic research study would look like. We'll welcome your questions and feedback at the end. So the proposed change to a late start for middle school and high school is well documented from many years of research. It's prompted many professional organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the American Medical Association, and other organizations to recommend high school and middle school students start no earlier than 8:30 a.m. Districts in 46 states, the District of Columbia, are all adopting the change. In Illinois, many districts, including our neighbors in Barrington, Libertyville, and Vernon Hills, and Stevenson High School, have all adopted the change to a later start time for older students within the past 5 years. California is now rolling out a mandated school start time of 8:30 or later for middle and high school students statewide. Unfortunately, the research on elementary school start times has not received the same attention. The American Academy of Pediatrics and other professional organizations recommend that no students start before 8 a.m. Yet schools routinely shift elementary start times earlier in order to make busing schedule changes cost neutral. So elementary students require about 10 to 12 hours of sleep. This requirement is based on studies showing that less than that is associated with negative effects on attention, learning, behavioral and emotion regulation, physical health, and mental well-being. So working backwards, a school drop-off time from the bus at 7:30, bus pickup time, morning routine, let's assume the child wakes at 6 a.m. The latest the student could fall asleep at night would be 8 p.m. to achieve 10 hours of sleep, the minimum recommendation. They'd have to go to bed at 6 p.m. to achieve 12 hours. Studies that have included elementary students typically hinge their success on the ability of parents to adjust their schedule so that the child goes to bed earlier and still gets the recommended level of sleep. In reality, many families may not have that luxury. So the aforementioned studies focus on sleep outcomes as their primary metric. They do not adequately and comprehensively address social emotional factors, behavioral regulation, or academic outcomes to a great extent. They routinely base analyses and results on parent reports. One study did comment on the deterioration of children's behavior in home after school because of the child waking so early in the morning. We also have aftercare, an unstructured care program, which would be extended for many children as many as 3 to 4 hours a day. Next slide, please. So where are the gaps in our knowledge? The obvious gap is in objective data of the impact on elementary students and their families. Another gap across grade levels is the absence of any long-term study measuring the impact for more than 2 years after the change was implemented. Also, results have largely been based on data from white middle-class cohorts, yet data have shown that sleep-related issues are more pronounced in racial and ethnic minority populations. Mundelein School District is demographically and socioeconomically diverse. Over 50% of our elementary student base is Hispanic. 30 to 40% of students are classified as low income or receiving a free or reduced lunch. Almost 30% are English language learners. Based on our profile, it's imperative to understand how these start time changes are going to affect our population. Next slide, please. So while the proposal to the families and the questionnaire was new, I'm aware that some internal work groups at the school have been exploring this topic for a few years. More information can help not only with our own district planning, but for other districts in similar situations. Now I want to discuss further what the research partnership would look like, understanding that it can come in many shapes, and we want to work together with stakeholders, including family members, students, teachers, and administrators, to determine how best to move forward. We want to make sure that the scope of the study fits in with the school's goals and objectives in addition to ours. Next slide, please. So Mundelein does not have a data processing team. One way in which Rush can support Mundelein District is by making recommendations for what metrics to measure pre-change and post-change. We can help analyze data in sophisticated ways to account for also the diverse student body. And we can help quantify how the change impacts student success from reading and writing scores to classroom behavior, social emotional competence and well-being. We can tap into community needs and quantify using cost analyses both the financial and non-financial impact on both the schools and the families themselves. We propose taking a multi-method approach and using a biological behavioral approach to understand the impact by objectively measuring sleep duration and collecting not only parent report, but also child report on morning and evening routines, sleep quality, daytime sleepiness or alertness, preference for change. We would also be interested in the social emotional impact of the change, both their social emotional learning skills, as well as their social emotional well-being. We would assess parent views through not only questionnaires, but also focus groups, looking at feasibility pre-change and what happens with the children's behavior post-change. We measure student success using common academic metrics like reading, writing, and math, but also look at other aspects of learning like teacher report of classroom management and behavior issues. We would be curious with the families whether they were successful in shifting their routines to achieve the recommended duration of sleep. We would also have, I mentioned, objective measures of sleep, data on how often the child was awake or asleep using actigraph. In doing this research together, we'd be able to contribute also to a widening literature on how best to structure student start times and their activities and inform not only the district's own programming, but again, other districts faced with these choices. Next slide. So an immediate opportunity is to partner with the district to look at the de-identified data from the current surveys that went out in April and analyze it in more sophisticated ways. We would also propose to submit a follow-up survey before the school year ends to gain additional data. We could just devise a plan and ask the school to adopt our protocol, but we really want this to be an active partnership. So we propose convening researchers, staker work groups to partner together to frame the study and agree upon both the number and type of assessment. We don't want to overburden any of the constituents, but we recognize that we're at a crossroads and we can make a significant contribution to the field and our families. Given our expertise in family support, which Dr. Winiarski leads, we also aim to co-develop strategies, trainings, and solutions for families who are struggling with the proposed time changes. There were some questions posed around the cost of the study, and our hope is really that we are able to secure funding to support this work, purchase materials, but we also think that we could yield funds back to the school and even to the families who participate. This will cost no additional dollars out of the budget for you. Any of the expense is really in time. We may need some of the district partners' time on work groups, sending out e-surveys, gathering de-identified data, or sending out consent forms and sharing it with us. While there are some grants that we will apply for, most do not yield funding in the first year. However, we would still partner with you during this initial unfunded time. In the meantime, we are trying to get some pilot funding. But what we really need to do a comprehensive study is a large-scale multi-year grant that supports a longitudinal study with the objective and subjective measures. Next slide, please. Again, I've said a lot of this already, but what we envision is at a minimum, collecting the data and replicating what has been found in prior studies using parent report of sleep in younger students and self-report in older students, along with reading and math scores. I focused my presentation on the elementary students. Given the diverse demographics of Manheim District, it would also be beneficial to collect some data in middle and high school students. That may need to be a separate study. You could do it at the same time, but a lot of times when you're seeking funding, it's better to streamline your efforts. Next slide, please. So moving beyond these data, we would also, in addition to de-identified data from surveys We'd want to consider add-on studies where we get the objective data. We would also want to measure self-report even in young children, and we've devised ways in our research department to successfully get reliable self-report data from kids as young as kindergarten. We want to look at behavior, social, emotional learning factors that help determine success or failure of such a shift. I recognize the importance is on the child learning, but the family impact cannot be underestimated. If a parent is not coping well with the change and is stressed, the well-being of the child is at risk and their accessibility for learning will also suffer. Pending any grant funding, we would add a cost analyst onto the study who would help us really determine both the financial and non-financial impact of the shift, recognizing that resources would need to be expended wisely. It may be that we could shift things a little bit and incur some costs with the busing changes, but maybe not such a shift that pushes things to before 8 a.m. in the morning. Ideally, we would have a year of baseline data, followed by 3 to 4 years of additional data collection. We would look at subgroups to determine whether the change will disproportionately affect any one group based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, language learner status, or even family size. While power analysis would be done to determine what sample sizes we would hope for and effect sizes we would be aiming for. We know that you've already successfully surveyed 50 to 60% of your families about the change, and that's very promising. That's almost double of what some other studies have reported when they've done sleep studies in school districts. We just want to make sure that we are sampling from a broad enough selection of the student body to be reflective of the diversity of the district. Next slide, please. So we know that you are going to be deciding very soon what will happen in the fall. And with respect to partnering in the timeline, we have a few options. In the case where the change is going to be implemented this fall, the most immediate partnership would allow us to support decision-making by analyzing de-identified data, looking at some qualitative analysis of the data you receive, and potentially, like I said, collecting a follow-up survey before the end of this month. Asking questions like, what time does your child presently go to sleep? Do you utilize before and after care, and if so, for how many hours? What is your race and ethnicity? Is your response contingent on other family member schedules or other children in the district? If the district decides to hold off on the change, then we can obtain a full year's worth of baseline data, and we can better interpret any of the data we collect post-change. We would aim to collect follow-up data and track effects both immediately after the change and 3 to 4 years down the road to see whether the effects are long-lasting. Next slide. Finally, we know there's still a lot of unknowns presented here today, and our goal really is to work collaboratively with the district to determine what metrics are inside the scope of what you want to engage in. We have our own ideas about what measures we think would be really meaningful to collect, and we can follow up with that with the board if interested. But we know that the meetings with key stakeholders are really going to yield the best results. So we look forward to partnering with you, and we welcome any questions and comments.
Would the sample size of this depend on the funding and the grants or whatever that gets faced, or what do you anticipate? How many people do you anticipate studying?
Ideally, we would be doing de-identified data collection on the entire district, similar to how they collect data now, sending out surveys. As I mentioned, when you do power analysis, you look to the published studies and see what sample sizes and effect sizes they were getting. And with those studies, having 20–30% of parents responding to the survey and having significant results, I believe that we would achieve higher percentages and have stronger effect sizes. I don't have an exact N. We would have to look at whether we're talking about within Washington School, within elementary school, or across the district. So those are some of the variables that will change. What we've done in the past with some partnerships is we offer incentives to the families when they turn in forms, whether or not they respond on the form. And that's something that has increased response rates to other studies. The add-on study as well, that's something that's a little bit of uncharted territory. And so we have a little more flexibility with our sample size because people haven't done such a comprehensive study before. We would ideally give consents out to all of the students in the age range that we wanted to work with, and hope for, perhaps a 60% response rate, yes, on that as well. We would again be thinking about, we've done in the past a pizza party for the classroom, not based on how many people say they're going to do the study, but how many people just turn the form back in. So I don't have an answer. I would say it's not going to be entirely contingent on the funding, because a lot of what we can do with minimal resources. The add-on study will be significantly smaller than the large scale data collection, because we would be looking to purchase the Actigraph watches, which are for individual children. But there are other direct assessment measures that we can administer more broadly. So there may be phases of the study where we want an N of 500 kids. There may be phases of the study where 30 kids will be sufficient.
I'm guessing that Russia's excited about doing the study.
Yes, very much so. So it's always research and practitioner partnerships are always valued. And we're very excited to have the opportunity to be in on this as you're making the change. I think a lot of times researchers develop the study and then go looking for the partners. And so the fact that we can actively work on this together and make sure that it's going to yield valuable information for the district is really exciting for us. It's kind of an extension of our core research team's efforts, and we're getting to put all of our expertise together to really design a comprehensive study. And just so you know, I've spoken with program officers from Institute of Education Sciences and the Spencer Foundation. And while those conversations don't guarantee funding, everyone is really excited to see the direction we're going with this. They all recognize that it's a really large study of what we'd like to accomplish. And that's why it may take a few different grants to put it together. But yes, I get off track. We're definitely excited about this opportunity.
You mentioned the watches. Who covers the cost of those?
That would be covered by a grant. So that's something where we can get a lot of the survey data, we can work on focus groups, we can do trainings with parents with less funding, the physical products that we need, or the protocol questionnaires that are copyrighted that we need to purchase, that we would likely need to access some type of grant funding or internal funding. But again, at no cost to the district.
It's always good.
You said something about aftercare being 3 or 4 hours later, but if we're talking only about a 1 hour change, I just didn't quite understand.
So aftercare goes till 6 o'clock, and the kids are getting out at 2 o'clock now. You could have kids that are there until 6 o'clock because the parent can't get out any earlier. So the concern isn't so much, I must have misspoke, it wasn't
I
that
just misunderstood.
they were gonna be there for 3 or 4 more hours.
Yeah.
But that's a significant chunk of time. And one of the things that was really nice, I think, in the district before the COVID year was the availability of some after-school programs that they offer free of charge to students. But I know that's something that the district could only support so many students in each quarter or semester in the different groups that they have. That's another thing when you're thinking about other expenses or other programming, it's more than just bus schedules and bus costs. We have to be thinking about the teachers' start times and end times. We have to think about what, assuming the park district is doing the aftercare, like what can they manage? What are their limits? What other structured activities can we provide? I think with elementary students, they don't often have the opportunity for as many extracurricular activities. So those 4 hours are their afternoon. And then if they do stay the whole time and get home after 6 o'clock, just thinking about their schedule and their energy levels and what time is lunch going to be offered? What time, will there be a breakfast option? Will there be any provision of food services during aftercare because of the length of time?
You just touched on a point that I think maybe gets glossed over or shoved aside, and that is the staff, the teachers. And how do they play into this study?
So we want to have them as one of the key stakeholders. And so we would involve them not only in our kind of focus groups and planning sessions, but we'd also be including them as some of our research participants, surveying them as well. We'd be looking at their report of satisfaction level and preference. We'd be looking at potentially school climate data. We would be looking at their perception of classroom management and how that works. What had they done differently to better manage the classroom, perhaps if the time change happened and they noticed changes in the classroom. I think having them as an active respondent, and some of these would be internally developed questionnaires as well, but gathering that qualitative data from them would be useful in terms of planning for the next year and in terms of providing them support. What do they need to have their kids accessible for learning? And maybe it works really well, and then we'll have that data and we'll have tangible information, objective information to really go back to the families and say, this is working well and here's the data to show it.
Because that time change can also affect how their family life is.
Right. And whether or not, they have kids in the district or in a different district. I know some other school districts, like the older schools, they were concerned about how late the start was going to be because the kids' sports teams play at a certain time. So I think also knowing, we talked about some of the other districts in the area that shifted their time. So how does after school look compared to other schools in the area that we might be engaging in different activities with?
In a study like this, how would you control for the social emotional difference, having to do with post-COVID and where this year you don't have everybody in the classroom and theoretically next year you'll have a larger majority or all of them in the classroom. I would expect there's going to be some social emotional impact from that. Is that just a data?
So I think everyone recognizes that that's going to be the trickiest part with any kind of studies moving on in the next year that are partnering with schools. From the social emotional perspective, though, we do have at least the benefit of the child's own within subject data. So there's different levels of de-identified data we can get from the district and also, active consent that we can do as well. And you may be able to survey the kids or do a direct assessment of social emotional competency, so social emotional skills, and also administer a self-report of social emotional well-being and have that data linked. I would anticipate we would do data collection at least in the fall and the spring, but we may also do data collection more continuous on some of these variables. So both, I think, for the teacher's perspective on classroom management, there we would be relying on their perception of things in the classroom pre-COVID. So there's luckily not a lot of turnover in the district, and I think we could have teachers even fill out a questionnaire this May that says, based on your kind of global experience of teaching, rate X, Y, and Z, and then have them rate again after a change. So that is unfortunately something that's going to be difficult to manage. And we're, I think we're doing the best we can to figure out what variables we can control to make meaningful interpretation of the data.
You were saying that you would hand out questionnaires to everybody to get people to volunteer to participate in the study.
So there,
So the study group then you would get from these questionnaires. So is there any concern that people who are supporting the change and those who are not supporting the change, would those biases contribute to the outcomes, and how would you control?
so I think there's different phases and subgroups in the study. And so some of it would be the de-identified data, some of it would be active consent where we have a lot of the identifiable information. We would want to know the information about, like, for the family portion of the surveys, who supported the change and who didn't support the change. One of my concerns, even though the questionnaire that was sent out in April had what we consider a pretty high response rate of 50 to 60%.
Yeah.
If you have 30–40% of your population in the white non-Hispanic cohort, and they're 80% of your 50 or 60% who responded, then it may be that there are people in the district who think very differently from our average of responses. And so we don't want to overestimate the impact of those data. And that's why I think adding extra questions to help understand how it's operating in those subgroups is important. So I don't think of it so much as a bias, but as a key variable that we would be looking at. How do the results vary based on even family preference for the change?
Thank you.
Would the time commitment be for families participating in this? Because, I mean, the survey that was sent out was a very quick click and, enter. And I think the response participation was based in large part on knowing that the district is considering a change. Please tell us what you think, as opposed to being our step. So I'm just trying, as a parent, is this going to add something else to somebody's plate, and how that?
I will answer it. I also wanted to mention that with the, now I've got, I had another response to you and I forgot what that is. But I think it would be important for the school to, send out information about the partnership in the study. You could do parent information sessions as well. The goal is that it's not going to be a burden to get the majority of the data. So by doing the surveys, and why other researchers have done large survey-based studies on this topic is because it's easier to get a few questions. And having taken the original survey, there aren't too many extra questions I would want to ask, but there are clarifying questions. For things that require more time, participating in a focus group, it would be people who are committed to wanting to be a part of the solution and understand what's going on. And that self-selection bias is going to be there. So you will have people who are actively involved in it, and maybe because of their interest in participating are willing to figure out the solutions in their own home and apply it to what we're doing in the study. The extra time commitment would be compensated. So typically, when working with funding agencies, you put in participant incentives for participating. The children would, depending on how the school wants to do it, we sometimes offer incentives to children participating. Sometimes just getting pulled out of class to do an hour or two of testing is incentive for them. So that's kind of, again, a shared decision point among the researchers. I don't anticipate any of this being extensive. We don't want to have kids missing instructional time to participate in the study. And a lot of the decisions we will be making and we'll be discussing with the district are contingent on when this change moves forward.
Well, I just have to say, I think this is an incredibly unique opportunity, and I really hope that we can make something happen with this, because it could be beneficial not only for us, but for other people as well.
For
Yeah,
the country.
I definitely think it's been surprising to see the scarcity of research on this, knowing that most of the districts that make the change for the older students end up shifting things earlier for the younger students. And they're doing that to accommodate what they need to, but because there's a gap in the knowledge on what that effect does. I'm sorry, I did all the time.
That's fine. That's great.
Moral support.
That's right.
So our intent is to go forward with doing the study. That was what we've talked about. When we met with representatives, because the flexibility of it is based off of whatever we actually have as an outcome for this evening. And I think regardless of that decision with the start time, we need to have that information in that partnership to know what to do moving forward. Because we might find out, say we go to the proposal time, we might find out things are just going in the wrong direction. And they'll be able to help us do that. And it does create a very unique opportunity for us, and something I think we should be proud of. Because I think what we've tried to start priding ourselves on is being informed. And this is certainly one of those ways to be able to do that. And it's worth going on the venture. So main reason wanting to be able to come tonight and hear the presentation is for you to be able to get a better sense of kind of what we've been talking about, so that you understand it, because certainly once this goes public and families are starting to have people correspond with them, you're going to hear about it. So we want you to be able to speak knowledgeably about it and know what we're doing.
What were those quotes you put on the wall at the last meeting?
Underlines the destination. Got it.
Well, I think you're right, Kevin, because once it does go public, people are gonna go, well, how are you paying for this? How is it funded? And then we have the opportunity to say, well, basically it's being covered by the study, by Rush.
And it really is program evaluation for the district, and that was the point that I had forgotten to make earlier. So we're supporting the program evaluation piece for you. And the benefit to us is that we can analyze those data, get publications, spread the knowledge. But really think of us as kind of a support for what you want to do. And people can opt out.
Are we gonna get check-ins, like, if we're gonna move forward, right? So are we gonna get like reports on how the studies are going? Something.
I would assume there'd be normal points where we want to check in. I don't know how much we feel to share data wise or anything, but at least progress updates or something.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be important and feasible both for the board, but also to offer that information to families.
If we learned that from the last time. We'll have check-ins.
Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, stay.
Okay.
If you do have stuff to go, you can go. And if not, I'll see what you need. There you go. So,
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. You got it?
All right, last but not least, kind of a follow-up to the sleep study. Let's talk about the time change potentially for our schools for next year. So our pilot is going to be presenting on that.
Good evening. My name is Mark Pilot. I'm the principal at Carl Sandburg Middle School. I'm here to give you an update from the March board meeting when we proposed the change to school times, and then some options that Kevin's gonna talk, Dr. Myers is gonna talk about as well. So if we can go to the next slide, if you'll recall, we approached the board with this change due to the research that was just referenced, showing everything that we've said. And then the other part came from 120 and just how their bus times with our shared services, they're having kids drop off and get picked up about 45 minutes before and after school. So there's a delay for the Mundelein High School students and just sitting around before they even get to do anything. So we're trying to help them solve that as well. So this was a partnership between the two districts as it was expressed on the next slide. Every school made a compromise to come to the times, the start times that we had shown you in March. Upon that, you said, yep, go ahead and take a look at it. We'd like some community feedback. And so we did that. And the next slide shows, one more, shows how we did that. Basically, coming off that board meeting the week of April 14th, both D75 and 120 did a joint presentation to the community as a whole about the changed start times. We then, the following week, had individual Q&A sessions at each school. We listed out the attendees for you. And then finally, we gave a survey that ran from April 15th through about April 29th. Based on that, and then of course, we met with the staff. That was done more through staff meeting discussions, BLT discussions, and we did meet with the union. There wasn't a lot of change to the teacher schedule due to this. It was really just an adjustment of time. So based on that feedback, what we got was this in summary is on the next slide. As was referenced in the earlier presentation, we did receive about 56% of our parents' feedback, and we had about a third cutting across. It was a third and a third and a third. We had a third say they didn't agree with it. We had a third say that they strongly agreed with it, and then we had a third say that what we interpreted as a 2 was they agreed with it. And so from that, we had about 69% of our families voted as a 2 or a 3. From that, we broke it down to the schools, and based on, again, that presentation earlier, if you go to the next slide, Anna, you can kind of see the concerns. The younger students were more in disagreement, and that included families who had multiple kids at every school. So you can see the numbers, for example, in that far left-hand column, right? You got that with your left, where it says strongly disagree. Thank you, just making sure. But that's that left-hand column, 118 at Washington, it decreases as you get down towards Sandburg and the older students. And then it increases in the opposite direction when you get to strongly agree. So you did see that it was focused on the intent was to help the older kids, and our community responded to that. When you go to the next slide, what we found out from the parent concerns through the comments and the attendees at the Q&A is there are concerns, as you just discussed in the last presentation, about daycare. There's concern about time of daycare, availability of daycare. We also ran into some questions about pickup times for younger students. We were focused on making sure young students weren't standing in the bus stop, at the bus stop in the dark. And we did run into some issues with twilight times. Twilight, learned a lot. Twilight is actually when you don't need the headlights on your car or the street lights go off, whereas sunrise is when the sun just comes above the horizon. I didn't know that. So you're a learner every day. So live the code, because I discovered something new. But anyway, we found out that there are some concerns December through January or December through February, where it is going to be dark if we don't get later start time, if we go to that 7:45 time. We also had, as was referenced in the earlier presentation, we found out a lot through the parent comments about what they were concerned about in their household routines and getting a student to bed when they have to get up at 7 to get a 7:45 bus, or to get to school at 7:45. That means they are going to bed around 6:30 if we're going to follow the recommendations. And then finally, that was the last point. And so the next slide, finally, what we came up with is 3 options, and you can see them listed on the board. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Myers, who's been in contact with Mundelein High School, working with T to talk in more detail, but you can see 3 choices that we are left with. You're welcome.
First, before I continue on, a big thank you goes to Mark, and working with Dr. Kroll at the high school to go through the study. Both districts have explored this option a number of times, and this is the furthest that we've gotten to in this process. So big kudos to that. What we did is we went through back and came back with some options. So right now, what we did is add a 3rd option, because we figured we'd lay everything on the table, and then we would provide you a recommendation. So 3 recommendations are to continue with our non-pandemic start times. So go to what we used to be doing before. That would mean our younger students would be going into school later, as they normally would. Same with Mechanics Grove. And as the kids got older, once they got to Sandburg, they would be coming back into the building earlier again. And same would happen with the high school. But now we're going to focus on K-8, which we know older kids going in earlier, research says that's not the best thing for them. The other option is to move to the proposed time, which would create Washington going to school earlier. And Anna, would you go to the schedule time, please? That is one more. Yep. Which would be this one. So that's the one with the change that we were talking about, and the feedback that Mark had in regards to some of the impacts and concerns families would have, specifically at Washington, with having a school start time at 7:45. And that's where she did articulate that a student would need to be getting up or going to bed roughly by 7 o'clock at night in that age bracket if they're going to get their 10 to 11 hours of sleep. and be able to get moving along. That would be the second option. And the third option is to, if we go back up to the proposals, please. On the bottom, sorry. On the bottom. So we look at this as another possible option. If we wanted to try to make it where all the schools could have a later start time, it would approximately cost $350,000 for 75. And if that happened, that would also have a cost for District 120. So that's why at the beginning we said we needed to monitor what the busing was going to do, because whatever one district does, it impacts the other. Being the person that's working with both districts, I'm going to only recommend things that I think are best for both districts as we go forward. So the money option, and there would be an agreement to use 1 year of a fund balance to make this happen. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is that would be contingent upon the bus company being able to get drivers and have the buses. So what it comes down to for us, from an administrative point, I'll tell you, it's been tough because we've had the survey data where it showed support for it, and we see the benefits. In the end, the recommendation that we'll provide to you as a board is to stay with our pre-pandemic schedule, go back to their schedule. With the knowledge that we are going to go through the study with Rush, obtain more information. We are going to have our bid process for our buses start up in January. So we're going to be up on our contract. We'll incorporate the start times that we think would be best at that time, with the goal of everybody starting later, and provides us enough time to also work with our families to make that adjustment. And then be able to say, we would look at August of 2022 as being a start time for proposing and implementing new start times for all of our schools. And that would be for the District 75 schools and also with District 120.
So staying with the current, then, the study would use that as a baseline
Yes, sir.
and then hopefully move this, the next year out to the newer schedule. Option 2.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on the cost for unshared? Is that to maintain the bus routes as they are? Or is, because we had talked a little bit in the pre-meeting about perhaps going to something like a neighborhood route that would hit multiple schools or
So we
some
haven't done that
creative
part yet.
thing like that.
Yep. So the 350,000 for 75 would just be to add new routes to be able to provide Washington the later start time, essentially. That's all that would be. We would start investigating how to potentially lower that. One of the options is to look at neighborhood routes, meaning have K-5 buses, and they would go through that neighborhood, and all the K-5 kids would be picked up. They would get dropped off at each building. And then the other one would be, we'd look at K-6 through 12 buses. Go through the neighborhood, drop off Sandburg, then to the high school. Would be the other option. The reason we would look at that, it's reducing the number of routes that your buses need to run. Because technically right now you could have a bus going through the same neighborhood for each building. So 4 different routes, 5 different routes.
But at different times,
Pardon?
but at different times, because,
Correct.
yeah. And so essentially the cost that you've got listed up there would be if we basically didn't share our transportation with the high school, so that the high school could run their buses and our district could run our buses in order to accommodate each school without being able, because right now we have, between the 4 schools, if we look at Washington, Sandburg, MG, and the high school, we share 2 and 2, so that we essentially have 2 groups of buses, right? So that would be to look at each school sort of independently and do what we think is necessary. But the way that I look at this, if we're trying to accomplish 8 a.m. or later start time for our schools, all schools, for 15 minutes, we're essentially talking, the difference between 7:45 and 8 is $350,000.
Because you're not sharing those routes.
Right. That seems like a lot of money for 15 minutes.
But it's hard, you can't quantify. You don't
I
know
get
what's
it.
gonna happen academically, but
Right.
again, it's everything on the table.
Right. And you said our bus bids are due in January, but we're not gonna have any of the data back from all of the studies or whatever else by that point. So
No,
Yes.
but we should in fall or late spring start having some information of what we have from early indications. Just think that nothing would be final, but I would imagine March. We'll talk to that more, but they would be able to help us provide a more informed decision. And regardless of what they're telling us, we know even minimally from what they said tonight, 8 o'clock, most people say would be the latest or earliest you want younger students to start. Well, if we put in our bus bids for that way, then the company knows that already. So it's right up front.
And they, for the most part, should be able to adjust.
I didn't think to ask this before, so I don't, but do we know, because we do have at Washington a before care, well, maybe not now, but in the before times,
Yeah.
we had a before care option that opened at 7 for families that paid for that option to drop off their kids for people who have to be at work before 8:45, when school starts in the pre-pandemic time. Do we know how many kids utilize that service? Because just like there are some after-school issues in daycare, starting this a little earlier would actually eliminate the need for the before care and save some families money. And those kids are all have been doing it, for you, because some families have to go to work rooms. So I was just curious if we.
I
knew-
don't know the
Okay.
total number of
No, I
families
don't.
that utilize that right now.
I acknowledge I surprised you with that, so I'm sorry.
Anyone have a ballpark figure about what the percentages of our students that ride the bus?
Yes.
You got it?
Look it up, but I do say it. Kind of depends by area.
Yeah,
Bus driver.
One of the things for the new board members to know is that Illinois school code, the rule is that you have to bus kids that are more than 1.5 miles from the school. But Mundelein 75 does 1.2 miles. It's a decision that previous boards have made that we wanted to offer that service to people. And T, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like one time, a number of years ago, we looked at what would the difference be financially if we changed that to the 1.5 required by, and it wasn't really a big deal, right?
It was not, but we also were given information from, at the time, not Lakeside, what was our old company, Durham. And when we switched over to Lakeside, we found that they had people coded incorrectly.
Okay.
So I can't say it is, I can't say it isn't. I just want to be sure that if you're given different information at a later date.
Right, okay.
7%.
But the cost was like, we thought, oh, we take all this money.
Yeah,
It wasn't really the case. Because there were, depending on where the kids are and what school they're going to, that mileage was, it was
Chances
that
are
very-
that in that 3/10 of a mile, you're already casting those kids anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I would think
Mark
with-
just said that we have 67% of our students ride a bus, 1,104 out of 1,650.
to
I
your
know, I
point-
drove,
That's more than I would have guessed. I would
Yeah.
have thought it would be smaller.
And to your point, if we did what Lisa was saying with some creative ideas by neighborhood busing, we're then gonna have the same policy issue. We have to come up with which neighborhoods are we going to serve with buses? Because if we're doing neighborhood buses, you could be 1.5, because I know in our neighborhood, we only get bused to one school of the 4.
Right.
So if you did neighborhoods, then how do we measure that? And then we're gonna have cost issues
and pre-pandemic, I drove routes for Sandburg and for Mechanics Grove, and my buses were full.
But with the study with the survey that was sent out, even among the Washington families, which the Washington families had the highest number of strongly disagreed.
Correct.
But there still was a majority between the agree and strongly agree who supported it as opposed to the strongly disagree.
Yes.
So it still shows a large,
Which sort of, Mark, which sort of brings up a question I'm dying to ask. I understand limiting it to 3 choices, but why wasn't there a distribution?
Like, because I limited it to 3 choices and writing surveys, it's a lot harder than that when I got into the data.
Yeah, because there's really 2 affirmative choices and 1 negative, rather than a neutral, positive, and a negative. So, yeah, it's
It's another reason to bring Rush in.
Yeah.
They already surveys.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Oh, Dr. Mars, I was curious, is the high school going to take 5 minutes off each class period? Is that how they would get to that time frame?
I don't know,
The option 2. It shrinks the length of the day, right?
Yep.
Or,
For the high school, option 2?
yes, so they would be decreasing their class period by 5 minutes.
I was just curious.
I thought you were mentioning one of our schools.
Sorry,
No.
no, sorry, that wasn't, I needed you to put your 120 hat on for a second.
Come on.
Thank you for asking that question
Okay,
today.
let's say one.
Yeah, I had to do the math to figure out how many minutes. But I can tell you from experience, that's exactly what Libertyville did 2 years ago. So we could get, we started at 8:45. And they took 5 minutes off each class to get to that.
All right, hi, good evening. So I have the student services report areas. The first one being to talk a little bit more about the linguistic task force recommendations. So thank you all for letting me come back and talk a little more about this. And last month, we had the opportunity, myself, along with Dr. Debbie Nieto, to review all of the findings and kind of all of the reflection from the work of our linguistic task force this school year. So today I'm going to hone in and really focus on the one area where we're requesting and asking for your approval this evening, and that is in the area of changing the programmatic model to a 90-10 initiation in the school years. So next slide, please. Thanks. So I just wanted to kind of review the reasons and go in a little bit more detail on why we're making this request to move to the 90-10 model. As we look at our specific student demographic in our two-way immersion program, we see that we have a category, a group of students that come from an English, a predominantly English speaking household, or maybe English and a language other than Spanish. And that's a contingency, about half of our students. So the English dominant, or the English is the dominant language in the household. Then on the other half, we look for our students that typically would be eligible for English learner services and who mark Spanish in their home language survey on their registration process. And just as a little reminder there, what districts are required to do is when you have 20 or more students in a subgroup, you look to have programming, like bilingual programming for them. And so the dual language is the gold standard model for bilingual programming. So we're super excited and blessed that we have that for our students. But what we're finding in that demographic that might be Spanish dominant or mark they speak Spanish in the home is that in many cases, as generations have kind of come through, we have households where Spanish is definitely part of the household, but maybe grandma speaks Spanish the most, but mom and dad speak more English than Spanish, or vice versa. One parent kind of floats between the two languages and another, a little bit of both. And so when we have that, that's when we call that learner as a simultaneous bilingual. So they're being exposed both at school and at home to both languages without one being truly dominant over the other. So that's just you'll kind of see where that's going with the other slides as well. So we do have more simultaneous bilinguals versus a true sequential bilingual student. Next, our immersion, sorry, I'm still on that slide. Sorry, I meant the next bullet, sorry. Immersion opportunities in the day. This is another critical one. So our immersion opportunities throughout the day for our students, even going with that first example, it's really how much Spanish can we immerse the students in during that school day. So they come in the morning, they're at school, roughly close to 7 hours. And then if we're a 50-50 model, a little bit less than half of that when you consider lunch and fasting periods, a little less than half of that is dedicated to Spanish and the rest in English. And what we know, this kind of encompasses some of the other bullets a little bit out of order, but what we know is that the way young brains work are such little sponges, right? So their ability to pick up languages is just like so fast and furious, and it's so good for them, and the synapses are going and the metacognition and all those pieces. And so the more Spanish that we can front load, the more they're going to acquire and retain the Spanish, right? And that's like the newer language, or the language that they're not necessarily experiencing outside of the school day. So if they're signed up for softball or t-ball or soccer or going to the store, or the, you know, a larger majority of the restaurants or in those social gatherings, it's a lot of English, right? And so this is an opportunity to have more of that immersion in Spanish. Next, elevating the Spanish language itself for our bilingual students and English speakers. So just again, that value, putting that emphasis on the importance of the language, just that opportunity to utilize the language more, to see it more in our signage, you know, coupled with English and things like that. So just that opportunity for more Spanish. Next, research and best practices. So we reported a little bit on this in our slides, and then also in some of the board questions in April. I'm just going to quote a couple of the bodies of research that we were looking closely at. A lot of the research from Thomas and Collier. Something big that we looked at was the guiding principles that had a nice focus on this 90-10 model, and that's from the Center for Applied Linguistics. The most recent edition included, like, we had Julie Sugarman and Jose Medina and others that helped in that development of those guiding principles, which was that 70-page document that we looked at a lot in our processes and reflected upon. So those are just some of the areas of research, and there's additional research as well. And then finally, just as we reflect on our overall literacy data and that the initiative and the focus that we are having as a school district these last 18 months, really, and especially these last 12 months, just that emphasis on literacy, and we want to look at our overall performance in literacy. A large portion of our demographic of students is involved in the dual language program, so, and the two-way immersion. Next slide, please. So this is just, I wanted to kind of review, because when you hear 90-10, you might think all the grades or starting everyone next year. So I just want to kind of revisit that as well. So right now, our preschool, we have a bilingual, we don't exactly have like a dual language program in preschool just yet, but our bilingual preschool is about a 95-5 or a 90-10 in Spanish as it is, just the way that that program is laid out. And so we have that going for us. The first bar you see here encompasses pre-K through first grade. So that change from the 50-50 that's now in kindergarten and first grade. So long-term, we would see pre-K through first grade as a 90-10. This is long-term, and then I'll talk about next year. Then in second grade, we move to 80-20, third grade, 70-30. And then once you get to fourth and fifth grade, so right now we're a 50-50 model, right? So fifth grade is already 50-50. That 60-40 at fourth grade, we talked a bit in our groupings, and as I've been working with Amy Mosqueda and also with Dr. Nieto, we've had these reflections and discussions as well in our leadership team, that really even at that fourth grade, you could manage like a 2-teacher model or a 50-50, and you can incorporate and enhance through our special classes and things like that. So when I ask you, or when we ask the district to move forward on that 90-10 model, the true impact is really impacting kindergarten, first, second, and third. So not all the grades in the district. So I just want to be clear about that. And then next, where you see the 70-30. So we have one-way immersion currently in our 5th, 6th, and 7th grades. And so as our current 4th graders move up, the one-way immersion is being replaced by the two-way immersion, meaning we have the demographic of students from English dominant households and bilingual households. So as that rolls up, again, the two-way immersion will continue. However, the way we have the one-way immersion set up right now already, it's already a 70-30. So everything you see from 5th grade up is already how it is. We're not asking to change any of that. That's our current process, okay? So again, it's just those lower elementary grades that we're asking you to look at because of what we know about that language acquisition and the way that students can transfer languages and just pick up on all of that, the young, at that younger age. Next slide, please. So in the reflection and wanting to look at more data in our discussions last month, I wanted to pull at least one data set for comparison for us. So what you see here is our DRA and our EDL2 data. So our DRA data is our English measure, and the EDL2 data, which is on the right side, where we'll concentrate a little more of our discussion. The EDL data on the right side is the Spanish data. And what this measure, and I acknowledge it's one data point, right? There's lots of data points we use with our students, but this measure in particular, which is a more standardized measure, what I can share with you that it measures is it measures of our students, their reading accuracy, so like their accuracy and their decoding skills, their fluency, so the rate at which they're reading, and then their comprehension of reading. So this is a tool that we use in all our grades, and we're really excited that we've gotten to the point that we're consistently in the schools using this measure for everyone in our two-way immersion program and making sure that we do that to multiple data points throughout the year. So the data I'm going to share with you on the slides today is a fall sample. And again, want to acknowledge we're in a pandemic. It's a fall sample, it's a more recent sample, and it's a more comprehensive sample, and that's why I chose it. So, so what you see here is, again, if we well, I guess I want to start with this other piece of information. So when you think about where do we want to see our kids long term? Because we know that if we're a dual language learner, if we're learning in two languages, that we're not going to be exactly where in starting out where maybe our peers are there concentrating on one language. So what the research tells us is that we should see that in the more dominant language, the student should be on par at grade level. In the less dominant language, they could be up to half a grade level behind. Okay, so up to half a grade level behind in one, and you want to see at grade level in the other. So this sampling is all the kids in the two-way immersion program. So we would hope to see that at least half in each sampling was at grade level, ideally, right? And again, this is one measure in a pandemic, and I acknowledge that. So we would want to see that, and then we would see that in a dual language program up until the students get to fifth grade, and then by fifth grade, we would want to see them start leveling up and being at grade level in both languages. And then the research tells us that by fifth, sixth grade in high school and beyond, that those multilingual readers, they're outperforming their monolingual peer groups, right? So that's what the data tells us about dual language. Back to this data set. So I give you kind of the global overview. Any questions about that global? Okay, keep going.
Do we not do this kind of testing for kindergarten?
We do, but it's like a pre-primer reading assessment. So it's not really on the literacy development. It's more like pre-reading skills. So we didn't include that. But that's a great question. I can get that to you. So then in this first grade sample, we can see that, so the green is first grade fall readers, the yellow is half a year behind mid-K readers, and the red is early kindergarten readers. So when we looked at the English, we can see that, again, with that 50-50 model, we see more kids in the green for the English. And remember earlier when we talked about how outside in your day and your exposure in the community, you're getting a lot of English, right? So we could expect to see that there. Then here where we see the Spanish, we see that early K and below, so one whole grade level behind of this fall, we have several, the majority of the students would be falling in that red, so that one grade level behind. We have one who's a group of students who's about a half a year behind, and then one student who is reading in Spanish at the beginning first grade level. So I just think when we want to kind of have that data reflection and think about where does the two-way immersion fit, like what would be a motivation to move to the 90-10, I think this kind of illustrates that as an example as well in terms of that data. Can you go to the next slide? In second grade, again, similar, left side is English, right side is Spanish. Now in this sample, well, again, I'll focus just for sake of time on the Spanish visuals. So in this sample, the red shows that the students are in fact 2 grade levels kindergarten, right? For the second grade student, and then first grade, fall first grade reader, fall second grade reader. So you're going to see a pattern, you're going to see it kind of even out a little bit. And then Anna for the next one. So in third grade, we just added more colors and shadings because you can kind of see the idea visually going back a grade level. So we see that our students are, we do have some students reading at that fall level in Spanish, but more are reading, the English is stronger for our students overall in this TWE data. And then the next same thing. Thank you. And then our TWE program is currently up to 4th grade, so it's not beyond 4th grade for the TWE. So what we've done as far as 4th grade to show you this data. So again, we see We've got some students reading at the beginning of fourth grade level on this measure, but some students even first grade and below in Spanish. But we see that we're a little bit more even out. But right now, like our goal towards fourth and fifth grade would be to start to see our students performing, again, at least in one of the languages at grade level, and then really getting close in both languages. And that if there was a discrepancy, that it would be no more than half a year behind is what we hope to see. So we've got, you know, some opportunities here. Next slide. That's it for my data slide. Any questions for me right now?
You relate the data you just showed to the data you supplied in the notes section from Hawthorne, and because I wasn't understanding
Oh, yeah.
how we were supposed to relate one to the other.
So I think someone had asked what was the performance of other school districts in our neighboring school districts that have a 90-10 or an 80-20, like the higher percentage in Spanish. So I pulled, I have to, Lisa, I apologize, I have to like pull it up to look at it a little bit more closely again. Okay, yeah, thanks. So I just pulled this and it shows us that, oh, here, the percentages are awesome. This shows us that, so the unique part about this example, this is from the school report card. The unique part about this example is that by design, this district has a dual language building. So the whole school data, that's why it's a great data point, because the whole school is a dual language school. So we can see where the district's at and where the school's at. There is a little bit more here in the red for the school, but overall, in line with the state in terms of, so this is not based on DRA data. So this is based on the state IR data that's reported. So different measure, because I don't have access to their
Right.
their DRA data, but they're on target. You know, you can see here they're on target with the state, and then for the district, they're a little bit. The school itself is a little bit behind the overall district average, but still, again, on target with the state. And I looked at some of the other schools, so it just varied between school demographics. But yeah.
So if you were to put our stats in the same way, what would it be?
I'd have to do that analysis, but I
So like the district, acknowledging that we probably don't have the school.
yeah.
That's what K through what grade?
So what we would have to do is isolate the IIR scores by students in TWE versus students not in TWE, since we don't have a dual language school. Does that kind of make sense? But we could do that. Yeah. I would suspect that based on the data we're seeing here, we would see that lab as well.
Do we not have the data for our district?
We do. It's just, again, it's not segregated by kids in dual language versus non-dual. Any other questions right now?
I just wish we had more data to track our students over time.
And I think what's really nice is that the next is a really great segue to the next presentation, because we're going to talk a lot about that in our plans. And we have a really exciting that Kevin and I alluded to in our communication, an assessment calendar that we're really excited to initiate next school year. We already have basically piloted it this school year and have been able to do a lot of things with Fidelity, which is really exciting, especially in the pandemic. So we've been able to collect more of that assessment data on a regular basis, even in the pandemic. So I'm excited for what Cindy Samantha already has to share with you about that. But I agree. Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions?
What you're proposing would only be, as far as what we're looking to adopt this evening, is only for kindergarten.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, so this would only be, so I showed you kind of which grade levels were impacted, and I forgot that last point, which was what we're asking is if we want to like that gradual roll up. So for next school year, it would impact the incoming kindergartners. And then each grade level thereafter would be, as that kindergarten group rolls up through the grades, then the next grade level would come in. So it would gradually shift to that 90-10.
So we would keep the 50-50 program we've got going on now.
Correct.
For 1 through 5.
Correct.
Next year. And then I know that we discussed this, and then I know I asked this as well, but how will this change be communicated both to existing TWE families and to incoming
Yeah.
TWE families?
Yeah, that's a great question. So next week on Tuesday evening, we have a kindergarten dual language parent night. So kind of timed it that way for the follow-up meeting. We talked about it at the kindergarten registration evening, but to give more detailed information, waiting on outcome of what was determined tonight. And so all of that will be explained to the families coming into kindergarten. As far as the families in first grade and up, we'll be drafting a letter to go out. It should be going out, like, I believe, the first week of June, just right as school is getting out, or right the week after. That explains that, we're not changing anything first through fifth, and also to introduce Mr. Ryan Zach. And then Mr. Zach and I are going to offer in the summer a Zoom, like kind of like a hangout, like a Q&A. We'll do a little presentation about where we're at with two-way immersion and where things are headed and all of that. And then opportunity for families to ask questions. So we plan to have that Zoom this summer as well.
But just because we may be changing, depending on how we vote tonight, assuming, just because we may be changing to the 90-10 model, that doesn't mean that what we have in 50-50 is bad or,
Yes.
or not going to serve the students who are already in that, correct?
Yes, so the 50-50 model is a model, also that has potential for good outcomes, has good outcomes. Again, really like honing in and centering on as we look at our data and kind of make some draw conclusions and make some, kind of predictions and really look at different individual pieces, really honing in on that, our simultaneous bilingual population, and how can we enhance that exposure to Spanish to see those outcomes. But the 50-50 model, we have a lot of, our students are doing well with it. It's successful. Again, this is one data point, but really looking at how can we elevate that Spanish to give that additional exposure. So, yeah.
Oh, can I just ask one more question? Sorry.
Yeah.
So last month we heard about some of the issues that are going on sort of with the 50-50 program sort of behind the scenes. Is there a rationale for not trying to fix the 50-50 model as opposed to just throwing it out in kindergarten and going to 90-10? And then to follow up to that, why wouldn't we do 90-10 more than just kindergarten?
Okay, so the first question, so some of what we talked about was, again, elevating the language and the ability for our, like the communication when there's two teachers in a given day and a student's exposed to one teacher in the morning, one teacher in the afternoon. Just naturally, thinking to myself back when I taught in the classroom, I would know if Johnny was upset or didn't understand the concept that I taught in the morning, I would just know that naturally if there was an opportunity to reinforce it later in the day. While our teachers are doing a really nice job communicating, they can't communicate everything at their, lunch break, plan time, et cetera. So that is one of the natural pluses or perks of that movement to that 90-10 is that you do have, it naturally gives us the one teacher model at those younger grades, which helps with a lot of that, which is impactful. I mean, that is impactful that even when all the attempts for communication and collaboration, they're all there, but this offers us, it's just much smoother when there's the one teacher that's reinforcing for the student. So I hope that kind of helps, because that along with elevating the language and prioritizing language, those are two big pieces that kind of rose up from the task force. As far as your latter question, which was why not do more now? I think that as we look at the development of the learners in the program, to disrupt what they know and what they're comfortable with in terms of their day-to-day, again, a 50-50 model is not a bad program, right? We're looking to refine our, we've been in it for over 4 years now. So we're looking to refine our practices and do what's best for our students. And so again, the program is still a healthy program. So to change for students, they're used to getting half their day in one language and half in the other. We didn't really explore that so much because it seems like it would be a disruption of the students and what they know.
Okay.
Are we still looking at we are still looking at improving some of those communication issues with the curriculum apps and all the other stuff that's doing. So we're still looking to improve and take benefits from the task force and some of the other things to implement broadly, but not overhaul the entire thing.
Yeah, and we've been really specific in our professional development planning and just what that's going to look like for every grade level in dual language. We'll have 3 to 3 to 4 days worth of professional development opportunities this summer, teaming together. And we really, as we've been planning that, we've been looking at that piece, like that collaboration piece very much so. Thank you so much. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Cindy Smith and Laura Lehas, who are going to talk about our MTSS system. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cindy Samanza.
And Lori has,
And we're your student service coordinators. I'm at Washington and Lincoln.
and I work at MG.
And we're here tonight because we wanted to talk to you about the multi-tiered systems of support, also called MTSS. So way back in 2007, we had a district-wide committee that looked at MTSS. At that time, it was more referred to as RTI, or Response to Intervention. And we developed a district-wide initiative to implement MTSS in our district. It then kind of got turned over to more building-based, and so annually the buildings have looked at their MTSS process. But it had been a really long time since we kind of pulled back together as a district to look at our unity and our systemic, how are we different between the different buildings? We want to do that this year. So we developed a kind of oversight committee where we pulled together representatives from each of our buildings and pulled out that original document from 2007 and kind of went through and talked about each building, what still exists, what doesn't, to kind of get the results that we're going to share with you today. From there, we took the information to Dr. Myers and Dale Trudy and Jamie DiCarlo and the administrative team. And we shared an update with the board in our December 18th weekly update, kind of our process. And then tonight we want to share the results. So next slide. One more. One more? One more, yeah. This is just to give you some background information on what MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support, is. So it's a philosophical model that we want to get 80% of our students met in tier 1 with core instruction. So the focus is really having a strong core instruction in all of our areas so that 80% of student learning needs can be met there. Obviously, that's a rigorous goal, and there's many students that struggle with learning for a variety of different reasons. Sleep could be one of them. We've talked about that tonight. We anticipate theoretically that about 10 to 15% of students will need a little additional support to have their learning needs met. And so that's called tier 2, where we layer in some additional intervention resources for students to meet their learning needs. They're never removed from tier 1 or that core, so it's additive. So this is in addition to the core that they're receiving. Even with that, you can anticipate 5% of students may still need really individualized instruction and learning to have their learning needs met. So that's tier 3, where they get the core, they get that plus more, and then we look at individual problem solving. So that's where we're really looking at the individual student learner and their needs. And then special education's not a tier. So that's separate. That's for students that have disabilities and who are really going to need long-term specialized instruction to meet their learning. Okay, next slide. So as we analyzed our tier 1 for some of our strengths, we have lots of good resources available. The buildings identified that as a strength, that we had some nice resources. One area that we were struggling with was the foundational skills. And we had kind of already addressed that with our Orton Gillingham adoption and our continued professional development surrounding that. So we had everyone at Washington primarily trained last summer. We've been implementing this year. Mechanicsboro is going to get trained this next summer. Our formal staff evaluation process is very consistent across the district and all of the buildings. So that provides teachers with feedback on their core instruction. We have a curriculum council that looks at our core instructional resources on a rotation to analyze if, what's new out there. Do we need to update materials? That's kind of what happened at the middle school with the math program. So they pulled together to look at the middle school math piece. So we have that system in place. So that was a strength. And then we've had access to our consultants who are very specialized in their fields that have really been supportive. Some targeted areas for improvement from the team that got together is having that core curriculum map outlined for teachers so they knew instructionally where they were headed, so they could see that big picture. The workshop model, there was confusion in the district. Were we a workshop model district? Were we not? So we've clarified that and really worked hard this year to embrace that we do want to be utilizing workshop model as our structure for literacy. In looking, another area that was an area for improvement was this artifact review team process. So this is our teachers at Tier 1 really being able to differentiate learning for students and analyzing student work to know where are my high learners and how can I enrich for these students, and where are some kids that need a little reteaching on a particular task. And so we weren't doing that process as effectively or efficiently across our buildings. Many of the buildings kind of had that PLC, that professional learning community, but it was very different in all the buildings, and wasn't that term meant different things to different people. And we really wanted this to be really focused on Tier 1 differentiation and student artifacts. So we're kind of calling it something new and being very clear and intensive on what we want teachers to do in those team meetings as they look at students' artifacts. Then we have our reinforcing through our PD that's embedded with classroom walkthroughs, modeling, and questioning. So this wasn't happening on a very consistent basis. This is something that we're hoping that coordinator position, if we're able to get that, could support principals. This is actually administrators going into the classrooms, doing walkthroughs, supporting teachers, looking at student work in the moment to provide that in the moment feedback. And then we have an inconsistent reading benchmark tool. So the DRA has gone through some revisions, and Washington is still on the old DRA 2, where Mechanics Grove had updated to the DRA 3, which is the new version of the program. And then the EDL, which is the Spanish component, is still on level 2. So as a committee, we looked at, do we need to update the DRA 3 for Washington? Do we need, is the EDL going to be updated soon before we went to purchasing the DRA 3? And through our research, we realized that we wanted to shift to the F&P, the Fontes and Pinnell reading program. As it's newly updated, it has literacy in Spanish that's authentic. They're going to do their later version. They're in the process of renewing that. And so we did want to make a shift so that we can all be uniform K-8 with our benchmarking tool.
So further in our review, we looked at our Tier 2 level. And some of the strengths that came out of that review were that we did have data review teams, which are composed of building administration, student services coordinators, and then also interventionists in each of the buildings. And those were up and running in all 3 of our buildings, meaning Washington, MG, and Sandburg. And what they were doing is they were able to run data digs, which is when following the universal screener windows that we had 2 to 3 times a year, they were pulling all of the data across STAR, the DRA, the EDL, all of that data together, and sitting down as a team to analyze and decide and be able to identify students who were needing that additional Tier 2 support, students who no longer needed that additional Tier 2 support, or identifying students that just needed some sort of differentiation or problem solving at the Tier 1 level. Further, those data review teams were also meeting monthly in between, kind of modeling our cycle of assess, teach, meaning that the interventionists were working with the students, assessing them, and then using that data to instruct and kind of inform their teaching. And then we were monitoring that to be able to see how the students were doing and make further decisions in between those universal testing windows. Also, one of our strengths was that we have many different options and intervention models across all of our buildings.
such as some of our intervention resources were being pushed into the classroom to support the students in their general ed classrooms. Some of them were in pull-out groups or individual, depending on the intensity that the student needs in terms of the amount of time a day, how many times a week they were being pulled. And then also our intervention models are always considered supplemental or plus more. So the students were getting their core instruction, but then they were also getting that tier 2 supplemental instruction on top of that to try to accelerate growth. Areas for improvement. One of the things that was identified is that currently we are housing the majority of our student data in either multiple data systems, such as at MG, because they had adopted the DRA3, it was in the DRA3's website where they're keeping that data. But the majority of our district data is being housed in Google Sheets. And so you will remember that a few years ago, we talked about adopting a data warehouse. We did adopt EduClimber, which is something the high school has been able to do. And in doing that, we had some difficulties with the onboarding process and being able to connect all of our data, both past and present, into the system. And it was an ongoing months-long battle, basically, to try to figure it out. And ultimately, we ended up still in our spreadsheets, okay? And so one of the areas for improvement is that that's a really, it provides us good opportunity for analysis of data, but it's also limiting in some of the things when we try to analyze different program evals and student growth. And so it's also cumbersome and pretty inefficient when you're a data guru who's pulling data all day long. And then another area for improvement was identifying program eval protocols. Similar to what you're saying, Mr. Holly, you were asking for more data. When we set out on a path of what we want to do, it's important to have a hypothesis. You need to have a hypothesis so you know what direction you're going, and you collect the right data to be able to evaluate whether or not it's working. And so something that we really need to do as a district is come to some common ground on what are our common goals, our common targets for our students and our programs, and what data do we need to prove that, and be able to look at that in an analytical way. And then also being able to build capacity. We are trying to build a variety of interventions that students can have access to at tier 2. So we have brought on Orton Gillingham. We're extending our PD so that teachers at MG are able to get that soon. And then also we've been working with teachers and being able to provide Fontes and Pinellas level literacy intervention, and then Primeros Pasos, which is more of a Spanish intervention that's been put in place at Washington. In looking at tier 3, which is pretty much the most intensive layer of support that a student may need to be able to accelerate forward. One of the strengths was that we did have individual problem-solving teams, which are composed of any student, any teacher that has contact with a student. These are more talking about individual students one at a time. So if a student has already been in those tier 2 supports and is still struggling to make progress, we pull a team of their teachers, but then also other specialists in the building together to try to problem solve and create a plan. And then we set goals to be able to see whether or not what we're doing is affecting change for the student. And so those were meetings that were going on in all of our buildings every 6 to 8 weeks, with the parents included for those students, so that it was a real team approach. And then further, when those weren't successful and the students were continuing to struggle even with those additional sports and all that problem solving, we did have consistent case study evaluations and good supports in place to be able to move forward with that. Areas for improvement in this, none were really identified because most of them were related to the tier 2 level that we already talked about. Next slide. Next steps, that's more immediate short-term steps, things that we think would make good change for those areas of improvement. One is that this spring, we've already done a trial or a pilot run of the artifact review team. So at Washington, MG, and Sandburg, we have had one grade level team participate in this process led by the principal with the student service coordinators supporting. And we've watched some really awesome conversations about our instruction and consistency and expectations. And we plan to expand that in the fall to all of the grade levels. Further, we've been rolling out a curriculum map with our consultants, and then this summer there will be a lot of professional development provided for the workshop model. Orton Gillingham training was provided last year to all of the Washington teachers, and this coming summer it's going to be provided for the Mechanics Road classroom teachers, specialists as well as new or Washington staff that weren't trained in the previous summer. We also have made the decision to adopt the Pontus and Pinnell reading assessment, which will be implemented K-8. That's pretty monumental. We've never had a K-8 reading benchmark like that. And that'll be put in place in the fall of 2021. We've already provided our staff with PD on that and talked with each of them. And any that had any further concerns, we've met with or provided further PD. And then also, we have the consultants continuing to build capacity with our leadership to try and help all of us help our students. Future steps are our long-term plans. So again, I have to reference that we would like to acquire and research a systemic data warehouse so that we can have more efficient data analysis. But also in making it more efficient, we need to have some really deep talks about identifying those consistent data targets so that we're able to monitor what it is that we need, and we're not always looking back for what we should have collected to answer our questions. Next slide. Do you have any questions? So the data warehouse, that's for all students. It's not necessarily tier 2. It's an all encompassing. You
It
just
would
started
encompass-
mentioning it as tier 2
Yes,
because of the
because-
applicability to those needs.
Yes, yes, because the majority of that data analysis really happens at that tier 2 level, but if we had something that was more efficient and comprehensive, we could be using it much more broadly.
Is there a particular program or that does that, or what does that look like, or is that a future issue?
That's something that we would have to look into.
But different from the EduCarver that we already.
And that's what we kept referencing. We couldn't remember the name of the question. It was like, do we have one of those?
We so hoped EduClimber was gonna be
EduClimber.
our answer, but we just weren't able to get it to talk with our other systems.
The Fountas and Pinnell new benchmark for K through 8, how does that data interact with our prior data with VRA and EDL? So that whether we're using Google Sheets or something else,
Yeah.
how do those talk to one another and give us still information so that we're not just starting from around zero this fall?
There is a correlation chart that tells you if they got a DRA. And she asked me to print it out. It tells you if they got a DRA, what would they equal on Fountas and Pinnell.
So that we're still able to monitor progress over time.
So when you talk about adding specific intervention resources, is that to supplement what we have, take the place of what we have? Because again, thank you for this list. That was cool. That was, yeah, something we've been looking for a while. So is that, again, something new, something in place of? How did you just?
We certainly need some more Spanish intervention resources as, our program, our two-way immersion program keeps evolving. We have the need to support with the biliteracy program, so we have to support that Spanish development too. And each year new and better tools and resources come out, so we're always have our eye on resources. We're monitoring like those students' response to those resources. So if we feel something's not being effective, then we look for something that might be better. So for example, we had Jolly Phonics as a resource. We saw a lift in our skills and isolation for our students and learning those phonics skills. They weren't blending them to actually learn to read with them. So they had all those isolated skills, but not putting them together. So we were looking for a program that really helps kids blend and target and put it together. And that's where we found Horton Gillingham. So we abandoned Jolly Phonics for Horton Gillingham. So, it's a little bit of both. Some is add-on, some is replacement.
And with the enhanced data, hopefully then you can be able to track better what's working sooner.
Yeah.
Right, and make those
adjustments. Yeah.
How does the staffing work for the tiers? Are there different teams that work in each tier, or is it one team that works with all 3 tiers?
Tier 1's all our general ed staff. It's considered tier 1. And then tier 2, it's primarily our intervention staff. So we do have interventionists at each of our buildings. And we have adjusted based on our data and moved interventionists, looking at our data, where the greatest needs are at tier 2. And we look at that annually. We don't adjust, drag a teacher across town mid-year, but we look annually and shift that staffing based on where our greatest tier 2 needs are. And tier 3 is really the whole team, the gen ed teachers there, the intervention teachers there, anybody else that, we think might have a great idea to help that student, because it's really intensive looking at what can we do different to help this kid move, learn.
Tier 3 seems to be successful without any improvements being noted. That's going well.
The individual problem solving piece is going well. We do have kids that we're able to figure out what's going on and move them back into tier 2. So in that one pyramid, all the arrows are pushing to tier 1. That's our goal. We do have students that we aren't making great progress, or they're progressing, but they're going to need more long-term support. So, tier 2 and tier 3 is supposed to be a more short-term and lift them into the next tier. So when it's looking like they're going to need that level of support for long-term, that's when we start suspecting a disability might be present, and we make that referral for a case study evaluation, and they enter special education, which is more that long-term support system that's outside of the tiers. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
And for these tiers, this is talking about general academics in our academic programs, not necessarily children that need like social emotional intervention. Correct? Or is that
For the purposes of this conversation.
yes,
Yeah.
for the MTSS?
There are tiered models in terms of social emotional needs as well.
But for this model, we're talking today about the academics, so we're not confusing the 2 different tiered models.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's just clarifying, yeah.
And just Rec Connect numbers, enrollment was 40 this year, 93 last year, and 83, 81 the year before.
Or in general or for the morning?
In general. the
Okay.
total enrollment. Just like Harry.
Thank you.
Eric, Al, and Ron, you don't understand what a treat this is, that I'm actually speaking in public session rather than dominating just executive session. Prior to the pandemic, I had several groups of paraprofessional staff at the different buildings asked to meet with me to share with me their concerns about the current compensation schedule. They were aware of what other districts were making and wanted to see if there would be an appetite for the board and the administration to review that. And then the pandemic happened. But we kept in mind, what could we do to continue to try to be competitive and gather data. And so in December, I shared with the board a bit of a summary, recognizing that I would come back now to share some additional details. And so, please forward. So this is the current compensation scale for our paraprofessional employees. We have an entry-level floor of $11.17. And so that would be the starting pay for someone that has a high school diploma, is not fluent in Spanish, and has no applicable professional experience. That potentially can go as high as $16.37, but it's based on some pretty unrealistic criteria. To get to that dollar value, you need to have a master's degree plus 12 years of applicable experience and be fluent in Spanish. In the last 2 years, the average of our new employee hires in the paraprofessional category came in at $13.31. On the next slide, please. So why this is important is with our $11.17 starting pay. This is the starting pay of our peer districts. And the two that are most important are right here, Diamond Lake and Fremont. Goes all the way up to Gray's Lake at 1408, and then the county average is actually $14.62. Now that includes all elementary districts, and some of those are not what we would consider peer districts. But we try to pool as much data to give you an accurate picture as possible. We're the lowest in the county. Someone's got to be at the bottom, and we are. So what I'm asking for you tonight on the next slide is to give the district the opportunity to become more competitive, and that we would target 3 groups where we are starting to experience some challenges in hiring people. So the first group would be 10-month administrative assistants. We have 9 of those roles in the district. We have 2 staff that serve as 12-month administrative assistants. And then we have 31 paraprofessionals. And of that paraprofessional, there's 13 are within special education. So that the total group that I'm wanting to target would be 42 roles. The reason that we know that we are now having issues is that during the pandemic, we did not fill some of these roles because we were not having class in school. But now that we are preparing for next year, we are beginning to advertise and interview for those roles. And the 2 people who are doing those interviews, Cindy and Laura, are the ones who are sharing with them our salary schedule, and we're being rejected. It's also talk in some of the buildings that there are others who are exploring their options. They may have had a change in their family's financial situation with a spouse or partner, maybe losing work or not working as much. And so they are trying to find ways to or jump to other districts in which they can continue to do the same role, but make more money. As we've been going through a lot of the data, one thing that we have found is that if an employee does join our district and they stay longer than 3 years, there's a long likelihood of us retaining them, which is good in terms of turnover, because then we're not having to train new people. They have a comfort level with the district. And we are finding that a number of people who do work for our school have some relationship to the district. They either live in the district or they know people who work in the district, have friends in the district. So we're very desirous to keep our staff, not just attract new staff. On the next slide, please. So we tried to come up with a number that was reasonable and made fiscal sense. And so talked to T to figure out what can we afford, what can we budget, what would be an appropriate compromise for a new floor, but also possibly lower the ceiling, since the previous ceiling was really unrealistic. And so what we came up with that we think would be an appropriate starting spot would be to raise the new minimum floor to $12.75. That places us slightly above Diamond Lake and Fremont. That floor could go up to as high as $15 an hour, so it'd be lowering the floor. And that would be based on the following criteria. For up to 5 years of experience, you would receive a quarter per hour, 25 cents if you have an associate's degree, or 50 cents if you have a bachelor or master's. And then again, we're always seeking staff that are bilingual, and to place a monetary incentive on that piece as well. On the next slide, please. So it all comes down to what's it going to cost. And so when T ran those numbers, if we were to set that new rate, we would have some inversion, because we do have some staff that would be making less than the new floor. So what we would want to do is we would want to elevate the minimum salary of anybody making less than $15 to $15 an hour, or they would receive their 3% proposed increase, whichever is higher. If we did that for all of the employees who would be eligible for this, it would have a $23,500 cost to the district. It's hard to anticipate what post-pandemic life is going to look like. We have had staff leave for a variety of different reasons. But we know that staff turnover pre or post-pandemic is going to be a challenge for us. And we thought that now is a good time for us to reevaluate our structure to see if this is a solution. And we do think that this would be a solution that we can both afford and retain and attract the talent that we're seeking.
I have 2 questions. So the 23,500, that's an annual number, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then because of what's on this slide, so we are not talking about reducing anybody's hourly wage. So they would get either $15 if they were otherwise making that, or 3% on whatever they're making. So this is not going to cut somebody's hourly wage.
Correct. That's correct.
Then ideally, they could, if they met some of the conditions, they could be at $17.25 an hour approximately. Be back up the slide. So
Well, what we would, I want to make sure I'm understanding. the
Okay.
question right.
Oh, go back, go up there. No. There.
Okay.
So they have 5 years experience. So if they get, that'd be $1.25 added on to that maximum.
So what we would be doing is we would be applying this to new hires. We would be applying the last slide to our current hires. So they would either receive 3% raise if they're making above $15 an hour, or they would be brought up to a minimum of $50 an hour.
I just have to say, people that don't know me, I do compensation analysis for a living, and I think he's spot on.
Yeah, I would be, I think. I don't like being at the bottom.
Well, and also for the new board members, we did a similar adjustment to our substitutes pay because we were in a similar status. We were
Right.
lower and we were having trouble getting subs. And I would hope that
It did.
helped us.
I mean, we have not had, because we did
Especially,
that
this is
prior.
before pandemic.
Yeah, because we did that prior to the pandemic, it paid huge dividends during the pandemic. And we have now created a sub pool that is dependable. I won't say it's incredibly robust, but it's dependable. And we know if we have a need, there's people that are willing to come in and sub, and they've had that familiarity with the district. So we're hoping to possibly have a similar.
So I think if you look around at other districts and the openings, if you look at paraprofessionals, they all offer much better rate of pay. 75, it's much better rate.
And even if you expand it out, Shane, if you look at other than just the comparator schools, if you look at clerical help for, in general, again, if people don't have to work for an educational institution, they can work elsewhere, so you're competing with them better as well. And hopefully making the choice to stay in the district, because a lot of them have ties to the community, so hopefully we're incentivizing local people who care to come and work. Go elsewhere.
Does this wipe out the $12,000 surplus question?
No. That's included in the budget.
I think cost of 23.5 is minimal, really.
And is there a supplemental cost, because it's probably slight, but like they have the cost of benefits that are tied to the base rate or something?
Already included.
Thank you.
It's hard to believe. We're on letter G on board action items now. We're almost there. So,
We just finished it.
Yeah.
Right now we're on eight, come on.
wait a minute. Serious?
Well, the one we have in our town.
Okay. Starting my reports, I wanted to bring to you tonight for the board to seek approval for a job description for a teaching and learning coordinator position. The role of this position would be to work with the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning. The key part to this really is having our own in-house professional development person and really looking at it in multiple facets. And then you heard some of the options that we'd be able to do tonight as we went through the presentation. First and foremost is being in direct contact with our staff and supporting them and providing the direct professional development that we have in place. The example that you heard is we go through with the math curriculum. We certainly need the publishers coming in to work with our staff to do the initial rollout for everybody. The key component to that is once they've left, we need somebody else here to keep that process going. Because it's not just a one and done. And it's not just 3 years down the road. Every year you have new staff coming in. You have staff as we went through professional development. We don't remember everything they taught us. So we'd have our own people learning that process and being able to go there to be the resource for our staff throughout the entire process. The second part is being a good support with our principals. And as we go through and wanting to have what I'd say is probably more direct contact with how we look and what we're looking for inside the classroom to make sure the professional development that we are asking in supporting our staff with our teaching models, like with the workshop model, there are specific look fors. And we've heard those like going through some of the artifact reviews. Those are things that they're able to help and support to keep working with our staff on, and also bringing to the attention of the administrators in the building, saying, hey, here's what we're seeing going on. Here's some of the suggestions I have for us to be able to take in the next steps with what's been working or not. So it's another direct connection there. That's just another added support to be able to help benefit our staff in the long term for maintaining a lot of the programming that you're seeing us present to you tonight. The next part that I'd want to go over with you is having the in-house piece. It gives us a lot more flexibility. So ideally, we would want to be able to do train the trainer models. And what that would create is we want to learn how to do a new educational model. We wouldn't necessarily have to have a third-party provider come in to provide that initial training. We could send our own staff there, have them receive the training, become certified in that, bring that back to us then. And now we have that for the whole time. So it's another added benefit when you go over time that we'll be able to help see some of those benefits take place. The updating of materials. So when we're going through and talking about the example of the math, we start talking about updating materials. They're another key resource to go through when we get new materials coming in. You've got to learn a little bit of the new process for how to be delivered, how to be used. Those are individuals that could also be utilized to provide that support for our staff in those situations. So they have the hands-on piece, and I think the knowledge base that would be able to support our staff going through the process of what we're trying to do with professional development, looking at the different modifications we're trying to do with our academic programming, supporting our staff as we also go through what you heard today, the MTSS process. Key components, they're going to be integral in learning the data, what's happening, what can they do to help support our staff. So the request is to be able to have those positions. One of the questions that was in the document is this added expense. What is it? Right now, I bet it works to be cost neutral. So what we're looking at, we know we have a retirement. We have another staff member we know in the classroom. In addition to that, we've got some reduced cost also. So the professional development for literacy, we know that's decreasing by approximately $45,000. And we also know because of the new hiring structure we have, Dale, one of our coaches, reducing what her role is within the district as well. So when you get to that point, just with those items I shared with you, that's just over $230,000 that we know it's going to be reduced for expenses. So what we're doing is planning now because we can make sure it's covered with the ESSER grant. But we're also taking into account long-term. ESSER grant's only good for 2 years. So we're already being able to remove some of those expenses or reallocate would be a better way to put it. So after that's done, we still have it covered. So that it's viable, it's working, so that we're not putting any type of a hardship within for the district for the budget when we look at year 3. The part that's not in here, professional development for the workshop model. Next year's year 2, the following year is year 3. That cost is going to go down again in year 3. Year 4, the provider we're working with should not be in the district anymore. So that total cost will be gone. So to give you a perspective, to bring in a provider to do the level of work that they've been doing with our buildings, which has been very extensive. And you're going to hear from Pat and Dale, I think, next month. But the first contract that we went through with them was just over $200,000. And this current year coming in, it was dropped down to 172. So it is expensive to do. There's no doubt about it. Part of it is we don't have a complete structure to be able to help support that either. There's some pieces, but we need a little more. And then, to me, that's why I'm asking for the job description. I'm coming to you, looking to be able to reallocate our funds.
What's the pool look like for this type of position, both internally and externally?
So the first part out is we would certainly want to look internally. One of the goals is to develop our own. I think we have a lot of talented staff that could potentially fit in one of the roles. Outside, I tell you right now, I mean, we're late getting into the pool right now for finding candidates. Not that we couldn't. Ideally, we have 2 really great candidates, and they'd be internal. Maybe that won't happen. We might find we only have 1 really good candidate. What I'd say is we would only want to hire who we thought was a quality candidate. If we can only find 1, then we'd stick with that. So we'll see.
So you're looking for 2 positions. I think Lisa asked earlier, is one going to be designated for like literacy and one for math and science, or is it, are they going to help each other, or how does that?
They're going to help each other. So the idea would be that one would be stronger in your English social studies and another one math science. So if we can't find that, priority would be English and math. Go from there, and it would be from a K-8 perspective. Build support. Good. Okay. Next item is the amended 21-22 calendar. So, Anna, if you pull the calendar up, please.
1 second.
So Anna's pulled it up. So as we were going through our professional development activities, and this was primarily for our workshop programming for literacy, we wanted to make sure we started the year off with being able to dedicate some time to that. So what we did in working with leadership and our union membership was to go through and say what would be the best way to provide some of that professional development, because what we first started with was a lot of professional development during the summer and getting feedback from our staff, and knowing the year that we just went through, everyone was saying we need a little bit of a break, and certainly can understand that. So what we ended up doing and talking with the group, getting feedback from our staff, we took a Institute Day from February 18th, made that a student attendance day. And what we did was take that Institute Day and put it on the 16th. Now, it certainly makes for a little bit of a choppy start for our students, but we felt in the beginning, it's more of a get to know you piece. We don't have a ton of academic heavy going on at that time, so we could do that and then still be able to have enough time for our staff that day dedicated to, it's called a launch, launching what the workshop model is and having our staff go through those different segments together, and then giving our teachers that time to sit with their grade level or departments, teams, and say, this is what it's going to look like for us as we start the beginning of the school year. So that's really a big part about coordinating what we're doing. Now, we do have a number of staff that are taking the summer professional development, which is also going to aid in this. They'll be able to support their team members better. But that's why we want to be able to move the date for the Institute. The other thing that happens then, in talking with kindergarten and pre, they normally would have started on the 13th, but they want to still have their kindergarten prep day with parents, and they didn't want to have the kids start on Friday, day off Monday, come back Tuesday. So what they wanted to be able to do and what we put on the calendar, it's the recommendation, families would still go through their orientation on the 13th instead of the students showing up. And then that gives us 2 days with the older students getting into the building. They can kind of get settled. And then starting on the 17th, the Tuesday, the kindergartners and the preschool students would start that day. And then it'd be more consistent going through. So that's the request that we'd like to do for the calendar for 21-22.
So from a family's perspective, the only impact is instead of a 4-day weekend in February, we're making it a 3-day weekend in February, and a 3-day weekend in August.
Yep.
That's fine.
Yep, no, okay. Keep the Saturdays and Sundays.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Noted.
Okay. Next item. It's the board calendar. It's the board meeting where you as a board get to go through, talk about is the meeting day and time work for you as a board. So I did sit down, we went through and tried to keep it consistent to at least what we've done this past year. Looking at, it's one of the Tuesdays towards the ballot. I'm not gonna say the third or the fourth Tuesday because they vary depending on the number of weeks in a month. But it's one of the Tuesdays towards the end of the month. Maybe the third or fourth, but you get the idea. So that's the list of dates that we came up with. And it's up for you to discuss and give us feedback. So really, does the day of Tuesday work? And does the time of 7 o'clock still work?
So I'll go back and say, as I said every year, Tuesdays are sort of hard for my family, but obviously I'm here and I don't think I've ever missed a meeting, so I make it work. But with religious school and some other stuff, Tuesdays are difficult for me, but I know another member as well, but I'll make it work if that's what works for everybody.
I have so much on my calendar. I'm flexible.
You want to take some off? Fine.
We've discussed if we go Monday, it's hard for the administration to
Yeah.
give the
No, I know.
feedback
I
and when it's
Tuesday
bad.
is
We
good
go
for that
late,
purpose.
it gets into other conflicts.
I would say Monday is not, definitely not a good fit
Right. No, I know.
with all parties considered.
It's nice to be able to have the weekend to look over the packet and get the questions in.
Was Wednesday ever a viable option?
The later in the week, the worse it gets for me.
That's what I remember you saying.
I mean, I would prefer Monday, but you know, how are you gonna do 20 pages of questions? Because that's what this month is.
I don't think it's right for the administration to do that.
I-
Sounds like we're keeping Tuesdays. Okay, 7 o'clock.
And I think that if there was to be a major conflict where we could, the month before, adjust the date.
I think changing it is so hard. That's why we set them now, that way we can all plan accordingly, because we get them now and doing that. So
But some things come up sometimes that
Well,
affect more
and-
than one board member. So
sometimes you just don't, if you can't be here, you can't be here, but no, it's fine. I'm not,
I won't be here in October.
Okay. All right, thank you. So if I heard you, Tuesdays, still 7 o'clock. Okay. Next item is the school board resolutions discussion. They're due June 23rd. So every year, Illinois School Association of School Boards sends out the memorandum. I hope you should have all received that through your emails. And essentially, they're asking for our board to say, do you have any new resolutions you'd want to have proposed? Are there any amendments or reaffirmations for current position statements on policy that we have? Or anything in regards to a belief statement that you may want to submit to them? And Christy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's then voted goes to the School Board Association, and then that's where it becomes part of the discussion that takes place at the AAA concert during the delegation.
Yes, and at the first meeting, we all said, I'm the delegate, so these are the things that I'll be voting on behalf of the board at that in November, so. I don't have any particular resolutions I want to propose, if anyone else does.
Start paying school board members for being on the board.
But I think right now, more than anything, it's about making sure this is brought to everybody's attention.
Right.
Please think about between now and our June meeting, if there's things that you'd like us to have as a discussion, we'll keep this on our agenda for the June meeting.
Yeah.
So that if we've got something, we can get it put down and submitted by the time it's due.
And as your delegate, I will say, if anybody has something they would like, please make sure you're volunteering to present on it as well. There's a lot of pieces to that, so.
Yep. I would agree.
I'll do whatever's needed, but that's just different.
So then the last one I have for the open session is the joint conference. So for our new board members, every November, except for this past year, there's a conference for school board members. And it's held in Chicago. It's usually the weekend before Thanksgiving. This coming year, it's going to be November 19th to the 21st. Purpose of the conference, it's really for professional development for school board members. It gives you an opportunity to go to different panel sessions, opening speakers that are targeted for the topics that they have. And the other part that's really not talked about is it's also a great time because we have to post up at the board meeting. You guys can sit and just talk and get to know each other, really, more than anything. So we try to make sure there's activities, whether it's going to lunch or dinner, that we can do. It's people usually arrive Friday, stay through at least Saturday. Some go home Saturday night, some go home Sunday morning, depending. But it's a very good, I think it's a good conference. What we would do process-wise is share the booklets with all the board members. You can go through the booklet and pick panel sessions that are of interest to you. And then we share that October or November, depending on our meeting is. And then when we get back, you would provide your colleagues here a summary of what you attended at the conference. So that what we would be able to do is you could have a discussion. Randy might bring a topic back. As a board, you'd agree, hey, I'd like to see us investigate this further and what it might mean for us at District 75. We're asking if kind of need to know quick because they just told us it's open and they start to fill up the hotel rooms quick. We need to be able to know how many of the board members would be interested in attending because the district does pay for the conference, your lodging, meals, parking for the event.
I will say, it's also a good opportunity to get to know the D120 board members because usually they go as well. And sometimes there are things for both, to attend and deal with. So it's an opportunity to network with them as well. In my experience 2 years ago, I think all of the D120 board went. I think that it's a great opportunity and I would encourage as many of us as are able to do it, to go, because I do think that it was very helpful and it was really helpful to have other members go and then we were able to email the materials to back, so you can benefit not just from the little blurb we give at the meeting, but it can also be some underlying materials. And on some of the panels, you hear from some innovative things that other districts have done. So it really gives you a lot of ideas and things, to discuss and collaborate and talk with other board members of districts. It's good. So I would encourage as many people.
Yeah, I think you
That's
find
really
that, even some of the rural districts have done some innovative things that maybe we would never think of, the sessions are good because you can learn a lot about what's going on around the state. So.
And I imagine with a 2-year hiatus, they'll probably have a lot of innovative things.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it seems like a great opportunity. I would definitely be interested in attending.
It's two,
I have to check.
maybe.
I'm a delegate.
So when I'd ask if you're unsure,
I'm
you're in?
Yeah. 4.
Fine. So what I'd ask is at least it's a comment if you want to get back, either confirm if you can or not Friday. So at least that'll give you last time to get a sign up, okay?
So again, it's a 2-day thing?
So it usually, as I recall, there were some sort of optional, I mean, everything's optional, but I mean, some optional activities that started, I want to say Friday at like noon. The main big thing is usually late Friday afternoon, and then I think there was a dinner that that we did, and then the bulk of the sessions are Saturday.
Okay.
With a few Sunday morning that, you know, some people went to,
Right,
some
no,
people didn't. I went
I
to,
have to check
right.
some other schedules.
Well, and there were some people that didn't go Friday because like I said,
Well,
the
that's what I
bulk of
say,
everything
maybe
is Saturday.
Friday's an action versus,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the
Yeah.
Saturday was the bulk of them, and then some people either left Saturday night. But I found the couple that I went to Sunday morning were more like this, like smaller group discussions, which I found were very interesting and, you know, and still informative. But I would say Saturday, even if you can only come Saturday, I believe Wells only went on Saturday last year. You
I
know,
think
you still enjoy it.
also on Saturday morning, the featured speaker is usually a very good,
Dynamic.
good thing to go to.
There's one a day, there's always a speaker, one a day.
Yeah.
Really, really nice, great speakers.
I agree. There's one day you can go, it'd be Saturday.
Saturday, but there's benefits to it, you know. And then it's
And
usually
go
done
down-
by, you know, by checkout, like whatever, 11, I want to say was the end of Sunday, so it's not even an all
I
day
think
Sunday.
2 years ago, we had some really, really important cross-country qualifying meetings, so that's like,
Right.
And my son, the college level, not the high school. I would blow off the high school, don't tell him.
Then you can also go in the other hall and collect all the tchotchkes.
Right, yes, there's vendors from all over the place that hand out all kinds of fun stuff, but.
Including candy.
So that's all I got on my report.
That's it.
That's it.
Next item is number 4, consent agenda. If anyone would like to have an item removed or tabled for further discussion, now is the time to communicate that request. I have a couple things about the minutes of April 20th, I believe. Yeah, April 20th. I talked to Lisa this afternoon because I was curious about one of the action items on there, but I was virtual at 7:12,
Yes.
and then I was in person about 9:15 or so, I think. At that meeting. And then my question about the action item was the first one, the linguistics program task force recommendation. I mean, I was here for that, and as I recall, we did not vote to table that motion, we just sort of ignored it. So I'm uncomfortable with saying that we tabled it when we actually did.
So is it a procedural question you're asking about
Well, I think the minutes are inaccurate.
using
because
the word?
Yeah,
table?
maybe it's still using the word table because the board did not vote on tabling that action.
Well,
I
it
mean,
was on
So
the
it was
agenda.
not called.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
It was
never-
not
It was
called.
never called.
Right.
So is that the same thing as table?
Well, I would say that in order to table an action item, the board has to vote on it.
Okay.
And clearly we did.
I mean, clearly I didn't put a vote for tabling it, so there wasn't a roll call or a vote for it.
Right.
I think we just agreed not to proceed,
Right.
not to proceed to a vote.
Better statement be. I was thinking now that
It just says the topic was tabled.
or the topic was not motion. So is there a different verb that you can put instead of table that gets at what happened?
Because my recollection was, while our agenda said that it was going to be an action item, in the presentation, they had said they're not asking for it to be voted on, so it was a mutual decision not to move forward with it at that meeting.
Somebody could have called it to vote, but
Yeah,
nobody
nobody
did,
did.
so.
If you have a suggestion, I'm not against
It's not called for a vote.
Or something like, the item was sent back to the task force for more information or something, because that's really what happened, right? Okay, is everyone comfortable with that?
But is it accurate to say that it was sent back to them? Because it
Right.
wasn't a board decision to send it back. It was really, the administration did not recommend we proceed on it at that meeting. They didn't ask for it to be voted on.
Why don't we say that?
Yeah.
The administration recommended this be just information.
Okay. Sounds good.
We have to remove that then and make that.
No, we can just approve it with the changes. Okay, I move that we approve the consent agenda with the changes to the April 20th regular board meeting minutes as presented.
Second,
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye, Gallegos,
Aye.
Kitzky.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Pelletier,
Aye.
Rhodes.
Okay, next up is the board action items. The first one, letter A, is the adoption of the amended fiscal year 2021 budget. I move that we approve the amended fiscal year 2020-2021 budget.
Second.
Second, Mr. Secretary, please call the roll. Aye.
Kitzky.
Aye.
Gallegos,
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Pelletier,
Aye.
Rhodes,
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye.
Move that we approve the adoption of the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. Second, by Mr. Gagos. Secretary, please call the roll. What?
Maybe I heard that wrong. Sorry. I thought you-
2021-2022
Got it.
budget. What is that?
Yep, sorry.
Please call the roll.
Holly,
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Kitzky.
Aye.
Pelletier,
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Fingerhut, aye. Rhodes.
Aye. Next up is the copier purchase.
I will move that the Board of Education of Mundelein Elementary School District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the purchase of copiers in the amount of $217,000.
Second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Figurehead, aye. Rose,
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Holly,
No.
Kitzky.
Aye.
Pelletier,
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye. Move that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the purchase of the Big Ideas Learning Math Program in the amount of $83,500.
Second,
Secretary, please call the roll.
Sorry, Holly,
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Rose,
Aye.
Pelletier,
Aye.
Figurehead, aye. Kitzky.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye. I move that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve option number 1, which is the pre-pandemic schedule as presented.
Second.
Second by Mr. Hitzke. Secretary, please call the roll.
Hang on, what'd you say?
Option 1, the pre-pandemic schedule.
Right, okay. Just looking at here, this is option 1, and it says non-pandemic.
Yeah.
I said pre-pandemic. You're right.
Is that different?
I was reading the wrong part. I said option 1, I was right. Wait a minute.
I hope the pandemic doesn't go into next year. Let's
Yeah,
just.
but the
be hopeful.
pre-non-pandemic schedule.
There you go.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Kitzky.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Rose.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Figurehead, aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
I move that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the recommendations made by the Linguistic Task Force, Programs Task Force to move to a 90-10 learning model for 2021-2022 school year.
Second.
Any further discussion about this proposal?
Do we need to amend this to say for the kindergarten? Or is that implied because that's what was presented, but
Yeah, my understanding is that it's beginning at kindergarten.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we're all on the same page, Liz. I just didn't know if we had to clarify your motion, that's all.
I'm just having trouble with this, and I was pretty much on the fence because I feel like for a decision like this, we need to have more data. One of the things I wrote to Jamie was that when we first approved the TWE, the dual language back, it's almost 6 years now. One of the things that was said to us as the board was almost verbatim to what we got in the report was, oh, and of course, we're going to do the data analysis to know how this is working. And so I feel like, almost 6 years later, we have virtually none of that. Okay. So I was definitely on the fence. But the thing that really pushed me over the edge was hearing from Cindy and Laura and saying that Washington is using one version of DRA and NG is using another version of BTRA, which to me means the reliability and the validity of those are two different tests. So it's 50% of the kids are doing one test, 50% of the kids are doing the other test. So I just can't wrap my arms around the fact that we're going to change this program without at least looking more at, what can we do to improve the 50-50 model. So I just wanted to say that because I'm going to vote no now because I just feel like, I just feel really strongly about it that I'm so unhappy about the data and some of the stuff we heard tonight about data. We should be able to have this information and we should be able to have almost 5 years of information to see how our kids are doing from kindergarten all the way to 4th grade. And we just don't have enough to know. So I just wanted to get that out. That's sort of my feelings on it. Does anyone else have anything I wanted to say before we?
I will just add that I don't disagree with you at all. My only reservation would be by not proceeding. I mean, it seems from the data we have, which may not be perfect and may not be complete, but from the data we have, it doesn't appear to be meeting the needs of the students in our district as of right now. And so I hesitate to have us not proceed on what the task force that does involve experts and teachers and that I hate to disregard their positions. And I don't disagree with you, but I just, because I'm struggling with that as well. But at the same time, I hate to have us hear from all of those who I feel know better than I, that this is what they think that they need in order to be successful and make our program better. And then have us say, oh, but we're not going to do what you think is needed to make it better. So
yeah,
that's what,
I'm all for making the program better.
And that's all
I guess the one key piece for me is I'd like to see the non-TWE, like break it out and see if everybody in the district is like those red and green, yellow models, then that's a different story than if the non-TWE kids are, so far ahead or whatever. I feel like we at least need to see that comparison, not just,
I don't necessarily disagree with your thoughts on that, but I think that starting it and having it just for the kindergarten level, we can get a good picture and hopefully be supplied with the data to see how that's working. And, maybe it won't work. Maybe the 50-50 is gonna work better. But at the same time, also still focusing on the 50-50 so that it can be improved.
Yeah, and
then get more data on it.
I understand what you're saying, but the other thing is that now they're going to change the reading assessments starting next year. So how do we, believe me, I was here when we changed from NWEA to STAR. And we said, oh, this is going to be a bad thing because we're not going to have any. And sure enough, like a couple years later, like, well, we don't know because we didn't have this, So I feel like we're going down the same path. Anyway, anyone else have anything they would like to add? Go ahead, Rick.
I would make a comment. And I make just, let me put it in the frame of reference that I'm making the comment. About 4 times tonight, there were comments made about the benefit of the members of the board. So I'd like to make comments from the reference point of the outsider who's looking in. I don't know how many times tonight we said we're behind, whether it be with data, whether it be with linguistics, whether it be with the math program. And if we don't start looking at not being behind, I see this and what was presented with Mr. Carlo and the doctor. I wasn't at the meeting, but I listened to it 3 times to make sure that I understood what we were talking about. If we don't start to look at this and start to put some things in play, we're gonna be here next year again talking about we're behind, we're behind. I think that we need to put some trust and confidence in what was explained to us and where the starting point of this is going to be, and give us an opportunity to wrap our arms around where we're going, how we're going to get there, and make some observations. Because I still think and understand and had discussions when we get the phone calls that there could be adjustments made as we start moving through this. I mean, we're not locked into, if we're at even the other way, where it could move from 80-20, depending on how successful this thing becomes. But I think that there's got to be a starting point. I think this is part of an exciting venture to be moving on with this, linguistics, the math that was said a number of times how exciting that was. So I think there's got to be the starting point. I think the task force put a lot of work, they put a lot of effort. I thought they presented it well. I think start moving, not be in a position of we're behind it. So that's the outsider's perspective.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Secretary, please call the roll.
I didn't get the second.
Nobody.
I know that I,
Yes, we moved and seconded. That's why we could have a discussion.
right, no, and I'm not saying that, I know Gallegos moved and then also hits the second. Thank you. I just didn't get it. I didn't say that nobody did. I just didn't get it.
Got
Okay. Gallegos.
Aye.
Hitzke.
Aye.
St. Clair.
No.
Rose.
Aye.
Holly.
No.
Fingerhut. Aye. Villatier.
Aye.
I move that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the hourly wage as presented.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
Hitzke.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
I move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the teaching and learning coordinator position, job description as presented.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
Hitzke.
I move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the amended 2021-2022 school calendar as presented.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Hitzke.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
I move the Board of Education adopt the establishment of regular meetings of this Board of Education to be held at 470 North Lake Street, Mundelein, Illinois at 7 p.m. as presented.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Villatier.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Hitzke.
Okay, the Board of Education meeting will now enter into executive session at 10:23 p.m. for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of the specific employees of the public body. And discussion of minutes of meetings lawfully closed under the Open Meetings Act, whether for purpose or approval by the body of the minutes or semi-annual review of the minutes. I have a second, please. Second by Mr. Hitzke. Secretary, please call the roll. Aye.
Hitzke.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Villatier.
Aye.
Okay, that's good.
Good to go.
We are back in open session. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Holly,
Here.
Brooks,
Yeah.
St. Clair. Here. Kinsey.
Here.
Kayakis.
Here.
Fingerhut. Here. Pelletier.
Here.
Move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the administrator performance award bonuses fiscal year 21 as presented.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
Kayakis.
Aye.
Kinsey.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Brooks.
Aye.
Move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the administrator compensation increase for fiscal year 21 as presented. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Brooks.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Kinsey.
Aye.
Kayakis.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
Move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the educational support personnel compensation for fiscal year 22 as presented.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Kayakis.
Aye.
Kinsey.
Aye.
Pelletier.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Brooks.
Aye.
I move that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve a 5-year contract for T. Rancic, school chief business official.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Pelletier.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Kayakis.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Kinsey.
Aye.
Kayakis. Interested right
President's prerogative. Sometime tomorrow morning, you will get a Google notification from me with an exit slip to fill out. It's like, 1 through 4 for a bunch of things, and there's, I think, 2 questions at the end. If everybody could fill that out, I'd appreciate it. It's just to give feedback on how the meeting went, any suggestions, anything that didn't go well. So you'll get one of those after every meeting, so we just sort of take a look at them and see. They're anonymous, so feel free to write whatever criticisms of Lisa you want to write.
You can also say the positives if you like to. You don't mind those.
And then the other thing that we usually do at President's Prerogative is ask if there's any agenda items for future meetings that people would like to see. So that we can bring them back to the meeting down the road.
So I briefly mentioned this last time, and I know it was kind of out of place, but, or maybe I should do that. When I went to the IASB conference 2 years ago, I had attended at that point a seminar on the e-learning programs, which at that point we didn't have an e-learning. We were not an e-learning district and did not have a one-to-one, device, for every student in the district, which was basically needed in order to have an e-learning program. One of the things that was said, this is obviously pre-pandemic, one of the things that was said there was in order to do, one of the first steps to approving one as a district would be to survey your parents and find out, is this something that is interest, an interest in the district for the stakeholders, because it does require money and an outlay and all of that. We didn't get to that point before we were hit with the pandemic, and then had a modified e-learning program and everything to put into place that we made it work with being industrious. But I know that now that everybody has had an opportunity to live this as parents and through this, that I think this is a good time, maybe this summer, not in the next few weeks, because there's a lot going on, but maybe this summer when it's, parents have a little more time to breathe, and so does the administration. Maybe it would be a good time to survey the families coming off of the pandemic to find out, is this something you want to see us have as a district? Or now that you've done it and had a taste of it, maybe we don't want to do this because before there was a lot of complaints about snow days, missing work, and having not liking that kids were home. But now that we've had an opportunity to have the kids at home for a long time, I've now heard sort of the opposite, where some families are saying, but we need to give the snow days to kids, so maybe this is not something our families want us to pursue. And I don't want us to take on a pet, or me to take on a pet project and push it if it's not something our families or, budget and everything else can do. So I would be interested in having, some sort of a stakeholder, whether it's a survey or something else, just to find out where we're at, so that we as a board can decide, is this something we want to pursue? Or maybe we're just fine with how we're doing it and leave well alone.
I have it on the agenda from last meeting, so I was gonna wait until Dr. Cacciatore got in place. We can share, we have had some preliminary conversations. We're not, from an administrative perspective, we don't find it as beneficial for our younger students, K2. I think especially when we looked at it in isolation, because as we think about remote learning going forward, hopefully we don't have these long stints.
Yeah.
We had. So the remote learning would really be for a snow or emergency day. So then that means you would need to still have a device for every student. And then what starts coming into play is you think about the beginning when our families were like, okay, how do they do seesaw now? And a lot more like the training, getting used to that, for families that haven't experienced it, that plays a role. The other one, we have, I think it's just over 100 families, we know that do not have Wi-Fi access. So if we use that for a winter day, we would need to make sure, how are we getting the families the Wi-Fi? So we started to play some little logistical piece of that. And then it was also, if we're going to go one-to-one, and these are some questions we'd have to answer. How do we make sure the kids would have to have the device, we have to make sure they take them home every day. Or make sure the teachers have them and said, okay, take your device home, we might have a snow day or whatever the next day. So it's working out some of those things. I think we'd have to, I would like from an admin point to say, A, do we think it's academically better to put the day at the end of the year, May or June, or have the kids on the computer for that one day?
And I understand that entirely, and I'm not here to push
Oh,
and
yeah.
say that we need to do it. I would just like to open up the discussion and kind of, again, just see where we're at, so that if it comes up or something, because families were, just to follow up on stuff from before.
So well, so I was looking at probably August, somewhere around there, and it should be on the academic topics page. That'll be provided to the board for the July meeting.
I don't know when I could send that, and when it was, so that's why I thought I'd bring it up here, because I don't think
I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but could we get some details about EduClimber and when we're gonna get rid of it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything else? Think about it. Bring something back next time. Okay. Okay, hearing no other topics of discussion, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Kidsby.
Aye.
Sinclair. Aye. Rose.
Aye.
Davis.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye.
Aye.
Now the signing begins,
Yeah.
and you all get to do it.
So
At least
everybody's
a
got
little
to
bit.
sign it like multiple times, right?
Oh, yeah.
We've got to sign the same thing 3 times, so.